Councillor Tom Bennett. I'm one of the Vice Chairman of the Planning Applications Committee, and I'm chairing tonight's committee. To my right are my fellow councillors, and there's normally 5 of us, but tonight you have 4 of us. As 4 of us will be making the decisions on the applications in front of us this evening. I'll just let them each introduce themselves quickly. Do you want to start, Maxwell?
Councillor Maxwell Woodger, Queensgate Ward.
Councillor Sinalari, I represent Goulburn Ward.
Councillor Linda Wade, Earls Court Ward.
Thank you. And to my left are the officers who will be presenting the cases this evening and also offering us advice. The officer team is led this evening by Lisa Chung. I'll start with apologies for absence. We don't have any apologies, I don't believe. Oh, sorry, Hamish, of course. So, yes, the 5th councillor who would have joined us tonight is Hamish Adurin. He has sent his apologies. He's not able to make it. But we're quorate at 3, so at 4 we're fine. And I think there will be a couple of cases where there's 3 of us, but we'll get on to that in one moment. So, any declarations? Yes, Councillor Wade.
I'm an objector to the second case, 3444 Boxton Gardens, and I have to recuse myself from agenda item number 13 because I'm a shareholder of Notting Hill Genesis.
Fantastic. So that's why I was saying it only requires 3 committee members to be quorate, because Councillor Wade will recuse herself for 2 of the cases, but there'll still be 3 of us sitting on those, so that shouldn't be a problem. Any other declarations? No. Fantastic. Minutes of the previous meeting. Do I have a copy here to sign? Don't think I have. Sorry, yes.
Yeah, there's no minutes to sign.
Because we signed them at the planning committee, didn't we? I think is why there's no minutes for previous. Yeah. So no minutes from a previous meeting to sign. I think it might be helpful if I just quickly run through the order of cases this evening. We've tried to put the cases where there are speakers first, so hopefully none of you who are coming to speak this evening have to be with us at sort of 9-10 o'clock tonight. So we are starting with 15 Elm Place, then 34 to 44 Boxton Gardens, then 8 Holland Park Avenue. Those are all the ones we have speakers for. And then, just in case anyone is watching us at home, which I doubt, but perhaps there is, the cases after that will do 44 Hands Road, 16 Smith Terrace, Park Walk Primary School, 46 Abingdon Road, 2 Pembroke Walk, Tor Court, 115 Highlever Road, Bramley House, the Devonshire Arms, some of you might be going there afterwards, and 15 St Luke's Mews. And that'll be our cases for this evening. Right, I think that's about it. So I will hand over to the officers to present 15 Elm Place.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The application site is a 4-storey end-of-terrace property at the junction of Elm Place and Lecky Street. On the screen before you there are some photos of the existing front and side elevation. Things to note is the existing safety railing at roof level. You can see it marked with a red arrow there. Hopefully you can also see in the right-hand photograph there is an existing window behind this railing. Under the proposals, the safety railing would be replaced with the traditionally styled black painted metal railing. You can see the proposed elevation on the right-hand side of the screen. And that window I highlighted would be replaced with a new dormer window. This photographs the existing rear elevation. Similar proposals here, again fairly minor changes to the elevation, with the existing on the left-hand side, the proposed on the right. There's a new dormer window introduced at roof level, and the roof itself would be rebuilt to match the existing. There's no change in height or pitch to the roof. In side elevation now, again we have new dormer windows at roof level, and you'll note there's also a small extension to the rear at this roof level. You can see it on the far right hand side on the proposed drawing. The proposals also include a single-storey basement extension. This is the section drawing taken through the property, and you can see the building already has an original lower ground floor. So the new basement would be a single-storey beneath this existing lower ground floor level. Onto the proposed floor plans, starting with the basement and ground floor level. You'll note the basement floor plan on the left-hand side. You'll see the basement is contained to the footprint of the building. And then on the right-hand side, that's the ground floor level. Right at the bottom, you'll see the proposed roof light to provide light to the basement level. This will be within the existing light well. Turning to the first, second and roof floor plans, I've just included these to show you again that small second floor extension. The red arrows just highlight that for you to see there. There would be a new roof light on that element of roof above that extension as well. As with all applications involving basement excavation, a CTMP is required and would be secured by condition. I've included these images on the slide here, although I think it's really important to note that our highways officer has reviewed the CTMP and raised concerns with the proposed plan put forward, specifically the proposed routing and use of Lecky Street to reverse vehicles. So I will stress that that CTMP is not approved and it is considered that amendments are needed. That would of course be covered by the condition. This photograph, just shows you the side elevation again, and that is Lecky Street, where at the moment the CTMP would have vehicles reversing. The last thing just to draw members' attention to is the planning history. You'll note that a scheme identical to this received permission in 2016, and as recent as February 2020. Neither of these permissions were implemented, but the 2020 permission does still remain live until February next year. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we now have a chance for objectors to speak. I don't believe the agent or the applicant is joining us this evening, so we'll just be objectors speaking. So the objectors we have listed to speak are Keith Benham, Andrew Ellis and Nicola Howson. Are you with us this evening? Right, hello, fantastic. Well, between the three of you, or just two of you as you wish, you have 3 minutes. We have to be reasonably strict on that because it's a procedural issue, and it always sounds rude when I cut people off, but I'm not trying to be rude. We just do have to be quite strict for reasons of procedure. So when you're ready, 3 minutes.
The report by the Director of Planning and Place recommending the grant of permission dismisses all the numerous objections lodged against this application as being either incorrect, not planning considerations, or irrelevant. Without these objections, the application would have been allowed by the Department under delegated powers. However, I would like to draw the committee's attention to the following. Starting in 2016, this is the third application for the same works with no real sign that there is any intention to carry them out anytime soon. For example, no attempt seems to have been made to progress the CTMP since it was last turned down. Has the Council taken legal advice about the purpose of Section 91 of the Town and Country Planning Act? The Council admit that it requires permissions to be time limited to a maximum of 3 years, yet the Council appears to believe that granting repeated applications for the same work complies with this legal requirement, apparently making a nonsense of the statutory provision. Why does the Department dismiss many of the objections which appear to adhere to the Council's own statements and guidelines as set out in its 2019 plan? Why are not such things as disturbance to neighbours specifically stated to be a material planning consideration, paragraph 22.349, or off-site use of the highway only in exceptional circumstances and then only immediately outside the application site, para 22.366, now dismissed as not material planning considerations. If this is correct, these parts of the Council's plan would seem to serve little or no purpose. Whilst there may be no requirement for an applicant to consult with neighbours, does the Department not check the accuracy of statements made by an applicant before recommending the grant of permissions? In spite of several statements to the contrary in the documents submitted in support of these applications, there have been no such consultations. The property is unusual. Has the Council visited it? It has no access to Elm Place. Its entrance and boundary are directly onto a private cul-de-sac with no room even for the proposed hoarding to be erected on its own land. No CTMP has ever been agreed. If the Council's own requirements are to be complied with, no such plan could ever be agreed. Any plant and deliveries will have to be made on Elm Place, right on a blind corner of Lecky Place, from which there is no other exit, and to which unfettered access will have to be available at all times. Andrew Ellis will comment further on this.
As a neighbour and house owner living directly across the road from the proposed development, I feel that the potential distress, disruption and possible danger is totally disproportionate to any personal benefit or increased pleasure or improved lifestyle that could possibly be derived by the owner of 15 Elm Place from having a sub-basement added to a house that already has a basement. In addition, the location is totally inappropriate. The entrance is into a very narrow road which has no other access for emergency vehicles, which again seems an unthinkable risk for the development of a second basement.
Thank you very much. Right, as I said, we have no applicant speaking this evening, so I will now open it up to members of the committee to ask questions. Councillor Woodger.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we've got a variety of objections to this application. If you were us sitting on the committee and you could amend this application anyway, how would you amend it? This is to the objectors.
Personally, I don't think the thing is capable of amendment. From those pictures which were shown, those trees and bushes and tubs are not actually on the applicant's land. They're on a private road to which the applicant has no entitlement other than a right of way to get to its front door.
Councillor Lowry.
It's been noted both in the objections and also by the presentation by the officers that there are quite serious issues with the CTMP and it hasn't been approved in the past. Now, what usually would have happened and what we commonly see is that the applicants and their agents discuss with residents as to how to improve this and make it amenable. Has this happened? What communication has occurred? And could you go into detail as to this to inform us, please?
From my point of view, as a neighbour directly across the road, there's been no communication, no advice, no requests, no nothing. I don't know about anybody else, but you know, I don't speak to, and my neighbours are here as well, and we're all in the same position. So nobody's been advised or even requested permission. Nothing. I mean, no sort of communication at all.
Councillor Wade.
Further to that, has there been any communication with the person next door about the installation of the lift?
I'm the lady with the lift. I've heard nothing about it at all.
Right.
I've complained about it, but nothing's come back.
Thank you.
Nobody in the street, not her architect, her surveyor on this application, nothing.
Um,
And not on the previous one either.
okay.
Yeah.
I just a couple of questions. So most of the objections centre around the CTMP and the level of disruption that the building would cause as opposed to the end result specifically. And as you know, if a CTMP can't be agreed, which sometimes CTMPs just can't be agreed, and that's a result, then the work cannot go ahead. So based on that, there's two questions. Firstly, are there any things which you think a CTMP must prevent or must have? So I think one thing which is flagged in objections is that it shouldn't use Lecky Street, for example, in any construction, and that's something that was flagged by officers as well. And secondly, outside of the CTMP, is there anything that you would like to highlight about the sort of end result of the planning as opposed to the CTMP?
I mean, from a personal point of view, I'm directly across the road, and that small extension at the back on the roof level is no problem at all. But as you can see in that photograph, I mean, they're going to have to get the things in and out of the house some way, you know, the building materials, the builders, whatever. And the road itself, Elm Place itself, which isn't really shown on that photograph, is an incredibly narrow road. So there's no room for two cars to pass in the road. You have to wait for somebody while they come from the other end. So if that's just on a normal day, you can imagine how that would be when you've got lorries reversing into Lecky Street, lorries just being in the road. You know, if ever somebody had a problem, there's a lot of old people in the road. Imagine if somebody had to have an ambulance coming. It's just unthinkable. I mean, just for somebody to have a sub-basement, it doesn't make any sense. There's a basement there already, you know. The rooftop extension I completely understand, but the risks and dangers, apart from that, the risks and dangers to people's property as well, and the cars. You know, I leave my car in the road. I don't want a great scratch from lorries because they can't get down the road. And also, if they park outside my house, for example, what happens when the builders get the scaffolding poles off? What if they suspend the pane displays in front of my house? She hasn't even come and discussed it or requested any permission or asked advice or nothing.
Yes, just to double check, you are Nicola Howson, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so you're listed as an objector, so
I'm
that's
very concerned because Lecky Street is a no-through road. I don't know whether this is realised. It's a no-through road. So anybody having to get out of Lecky Street in an emergency has got to come past this building site. And I really think it's building, to do some sort of interior building, fine, but the subterranean basement, which is going to have conveyor belts coming out of windows and things, is going to cause terrible congestion to the front of the house. How are they going to get things in and out? If an emergency ambulance has to attend somebody in Lecky Street, it's not going to get through. There are 5 houses there, and there's no other way out. I mean, it's terribly narrow. Lecky Street is very narrow. You can't, there's only one car at a time. The back of the house backs onto Lecky Street in private land. The side of the house backs onto Lecky Street in private land. Elm Place is a blind corner. I have the house next door, and in the best world in the world, I really do not propose to have built, or hope to have, building things outside my house for a year or so. There's nowhere else for it to go.
Okay.
I know the CTMP can be changed and turned down, but at the moment there is a conveyor belt coming out of a window into a skip outside my house. If the house was somewhere else and it could be contained or done outside the front of the house, I don't think we'd have a problem here. But the location makes it totally impossible.
Could I raise 2 points from this?
Yes,
one is that
do.
Lecky Street, at the far end of this picture, are the basement floors of a number of commercial units that have deliveries and parking in them, and they have to access Lecky Street to do so. There is no other way in for them. So there are commercial vehicles using that street. The other point is that the records in the council somewhere will show that in Elm Place a couple of years ago, the council decided, because of another planning permission, to remove a bit of yellow line halfway down Elm Place and turn it into residence parking. It's a bit of Elm Place that I look at every day from my study window, and every time, as Andrew has said, 2 cars have to pass in Lecky Street. That's cars, let alone lorries. One of them has to go backwards. This piece of yellow line was the one place in Elm Place where 2 vehicles could get past. I raised this with the council. They said, oh dear, nobody talked to us about that. We'll come and have a look. They came and had a look and put the yellow line back within a matter of days.
And that's all very helpful. Thank you. Sorry, I'm afraid you can't ask any questions. I apologise, because it is important that we follow the procedure, otherwise we can get challenged on a procedural basis. Councillors, yes, Councillor Wade. Okay, yeah, we'll move on to questions to officers now. That's been very helpful, thank you both. We now move on to the next part of the meeting, which is questions from the committee to officers. So I'm afraid we can't interact any further with residents. So questions to officers. Councillor Wade.
I have a number. I was looking through the document and I went to see the street. And I couldn't see where the works area could possibly be delivered. Was that a consideration? Because looking at it, it seems to rely on the frontages of 3 buildings to be able to facilitate the works. So in the proposals, where were the materials going to be stored? Where was the skip going to be? And I think I am concerned that there is this possibility of rolling over these planning permissions. And so what is the ruling on that? So those are my questions.
Thank you. If I start with the first question, the current proposals include hoarding where those potted plants are that you can see, and then around onto the frontage on Elm Place. But as I've already said, highways officers are not satisfied that that is appropriate. So that's not something that we would be looking to support, and a revised CTMP would have to address that. It is recommended that a skip is used in some form of skip exchange might be the best way forward, but that's yet obviously to be agreed because it's not been tested thoroughly, as we've not had that presented as an option. So yes, no one's denying that the CTMP at the moment and the proposals for the hoarding is not workable. So certainly that's something that needs further consideration. The condition would allow us to do that. In terms of rolling over planning permission, we have to be careful. It's entirely possible for repeated applications to be submitted. It used to be the case that one could apply to extend a permission. That is no longer the case, but it is perfectly within anyone's right to submit an application to sort of refresh an application once it's expired, or as in this case, there is currently a live application that remains extant and can be implemented at any time, but there's nothing to stop an applicant from submitting again, as frustrating as that might be for those affected by such proposals.
I have an additional question about the lift. These buildings weren't really designed to be able to take a lift on a party wall. What test did the council require that in fact there won't be a problem for the adjacent building?
If on both measures in terms of structural stability or noise, or is it both the concerns that you might have?
Well, I think that there's structural, because I don't think that they were built for it, but it's also the noise transmission of the actual machinery that is required for a lift to function, which if it's looking at the picture, the diagrams, this is immediately up against somebody's wall, the party wall. So I'm just what tests can be applied, and also what recommendations can be applied to safeguard the best interests, because we know the party wall agreements are only as robust as the wording in them, and therefore what safeguards can the council provide?
Being honest, through the planning regime, it's not really matters that we can influence. It's covered by the building regulations. So much as though any internal works to a building don't require planning permission, that's the case here. The actual lift itself could be installed without permission. That's not to say there aren't other protective measures through, as I say, the building regs regime that would cover both the structural impact and noise. I should say that the basement construction would need to be overseen by a qualified structural engineer. That's secured by condition. And as part of those works, given the lift does descend into the basement, the engineer obviously would be responsible for the structural stability of that lift and the neighbouring property as part of that work.
But that doesn't take into account the vibration, the actual noise that is generated by the function of a lift.
As I say, the building regulations would have measures to ensure that there wasn't, unneighbourly noise transmission between the party walls.
Thank you.
And presumably the council's environmental health team and noise and nuisance team could get involved at that point.
I imagine it would be unusual at this stage, but should problems arrive, then
yeah,
absolutely, that's what
down the line. Yeah,
But
although
that's
obviously
after the event.
well, you would want to avoid them in advance wherever possible. Yes, Councillor Woodger and then Councillor Lowry.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around the CTMP. So we're just purely approving the planning permission. The CTMP is that currently a delegated mission to officers, if it can be agreed, or could we ask that the CTMP comes back to committee?
I'll hand over to Ms. Harold in 1 second, but I believe we can require conditions on a CTMP, and we can also require for it to come back to committee. So we could do both of those things. Yeah. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you wanted to modify the condition, you could, and you could certainly request it to come back to committee for a decision. I'd be hesitant to suggest that you modify the condition too much. It's very clear in what it needs to cover. We can certainly put perhaps an informative on to advise the applicant that in coming back with a CTMP for approval, certain measures within it will not be deemed acceptable by the committee and that they need to explore alternatives. But I wouldn't necessarily put those into the condition, and we might find that we're dictating that they should do something that also wouldn't be feasible. I think we need to allow the experts in the field to work that out.
Is there a time limit on how long it takes them to prepare a CTMP? Is there a time limit on that? Or?
It would be unusual to place a time limit on. You know, they have the 3
years. Is there a time? So it's indefinite?
Well, they have 3 years to implement the permission, and the CTMP condition is required to be discharged before they can lawfully implement. So in theory, they would have, if you were minded to grant this evening, 3 years.
To come up with a CTMP. Yeah. Okay, all right, thanks.
Sorry, Sina, just continuing on this thread, I just wanted to check the current extant permission. Could you clarify quickly what it's for and whether there's a CTMP agreed for that or not?
Yeah, absolutely. So the extant permission is still live and remains live until February next year. We haven't had any applications to discharge any of the conditions associated with that. So to confirm, there's no approved CTMP in place with that permission. And
sorry, I know you said before, but the exact details of that permission, what's approved?
So it's the same as what's before you this evening, and the same as what was approved in 2016.
Okay, no change, no differences at all.
No changes,
okay.
No.
Yeah. Councillor Lowry.
Just on structure, given the ample evidence there is that subterranean development can cause quite serious structural damage or even collapse of buildings, including neighbouring buildings, and given this is a particularly constrained site, what test has the council applied that we can be assured tonight, given we are approving it tonight, that the assertion from the residents that this could cause serious damage is not in fact correct, or is there no test applied tonight?
I guess, again, we need to be careful that we don't stray into matters that aren't covered by the planning regime. That is what building regulations are there for. However, we do require, as part of any basement application, a construction method statement to be provided that has to be prepared by a structural engineer and signed off by them. We do also require the project to be overseen by a structural engineer, and that is, again, secured by condition. So we sort of go as far as we can within the planning world, but there would be other safeguards there through other regimes.
So just finally going back to the CTMP again, so we've established that one option available to us is to if we were to grant permission, would be to require a CTMP to come back to committee. The other option around putting conditions on the CTMP, I just want to clarify. So, for example, if we were to say something along the lines of Lecky Street shouldn't be used, and that if Elm Place was used, that proper throughfare of vehicles, including emergency vehicles, would be required, which I assume officers would want to see in a CTMP in any case. But if we said something like that, do you think that would be going too far into dictating the terms of a CTMP, and would be better off just requiring it to come back to committee?
I would caution against being too specific. As much as I fully understand why it might be desirable to do so, I think really we should allow the technical expertise to work that out. Nonetheless, absolutely we could apply an informative that details that. Obviously the discussion tonight will be minuted as well, so the applicant can refer to those, and you know, we can make it clear that that is the intention of the committee, to see a CTMP that doesn't use Lecky Street in that manner. But I wouldn't go quite as far as amending the condition. The CTMP condition wording is standard and has been carefully prepared to ensure that sort of everything that needs to be captured is, but it deliberately doesn't go far as being as prescriptive as perhaps you're suggesting.
So, colleagues, what I'm thinking is that permission has already been granted for exactly the same application in the past. On the face of it, I don't see personally that there's good reason to deny permission to this case. However, it's a CTMP which is the main issue, and I think it would be appropriate to put a condition, an additional condition on what we vote on tonight, which is that the CTMP must come back to committee. So if it can be agreed with officers, which it might never be, but if it can be, then it should have to come back to committee and be approved by councillors as well in committee.
I would agree with that, Chairman, but having listened to the presentation, I fundamentally disagree with the application. I do not believe that the subterranean development protects or enhances this conservation area. So on that basis, I cannot support it outright.
Yep, that's absolutely up to you. But I think what I'm proposing is that we vote on the recommendation with the additional condition that any CTMP, once approved, must come back to committee, and then obviously members are free to vote however they wish.
Happy to second that condition.
Okay.
Sorry, Chairman, just to clarify, yes. It wouldn't be done by way of a planning condition. We would make note of the fact that it was a request to come back to committee, and as officers we would ensure that would happen, but it wouldn't be, you know, a formal planning condition to secure.
Understood, so it'd sort of be a de facto condition rather than de jure. Yeah.
But I mean, that goes as far to address the traffic, and also I think Councillor Wade has mentioned this as well, but it doesn't address the structural issues, which we do not have assurances of tonight, in spite of the questions that we've asked.
But it's already got it previously got planning permission.
It doesn't matter.
It carries weight.
Colleagues. I think I agree. It doesn't. If you have concerns over the structural issues, officers have commented on. If you still have concerns, then you should absolutely feel free to vote against granting planning permission.
I think also that things...
Yes, Councillor Wade.
Sorry, I think that times have changed. This application originally came forward a number of years ago, and I think that times have changed as to how we view applications. And I think that this is, if we have somebody who has, this is a fresh application, as far as I can see. And therefore we should be able to look at it with the benefit of different advice, different feelings, and different representation.
Yeah, that's understood. Although, of course, an inspectorate reviewing an appeal will take into account previous decisions, and I think that the fact that the exact same permission has been granted, I feel if it did get appealed and went to the inspectorate, there would be a very high likelihood that it would get through on appeal, and then and then that would cost council money. But that's completely your decision.
All right, Chair, but I think that it's safe to say that we can comment on the application. It still, I suspect, will fall foul of the CTMP, and I think you can't have a planning application without the CTMP, and CTMP without the planning application. So I think we're looking at two parts of the problem. So I can see that you're getting agitated, and we don't want you agitated because it's the first case. But I just think that this is a fresh application. It'll be a fresh CTMP. We understand the limitations. People are now looking at CTMPs, especially in constricted sites, in a different way now. And I think that you could probably get your out-of-jail card free by including that in your statement.
Okay.
Oh my God, somebody agrees with me.
No, all very valid points. In which case, I think we should probably proceed to a vote. This is a vote on the recommendation, which is to grant planning, with the understanding that any CTMP, if agreed by officers, will have to come back to the Planning Applications Committee. Okay, well, it's not technically a planning condition, but it will come back to the Planning Applications Committee before being approved. So on that basis, the recommendation is to grant Councillor Woodger.
To grant, Chair.
To grant. Councillor Lowry.
Not to grant.
Not to grant. Councillor Wade.
Refuse.
To refuse. And I vote to grant. So that's 2-2. In the case of a tie, the chair has, the vote goes with the chairman. So we grant that planning permission. But I do thank everyone very much for their time. And I hope you will take confidence in the fact that the CTMP has to come back to Planning Applications Committee as a proper check on the concerns that you have raised. Right, we now proceed to 34 to 44 Boxton Gardens. Ms. Harrell.
Thank you very much. So the application site at 34 to 44 Boxton Gardens is in use as a hotel. I'm going to start by just talking about the history of the site. You'll see on the left-hand side of the slide there on the screen some photographs of some air conditioning equipment. This was installed back in 2013 without gaining planning permission from the council. Complaints were raised and an application was then submitted for the AC units and an acoustic enclosure to cover the units, to hide them, and also to provide attenuation measures. The right-hand images are sort of CGI mock-ups of what that would have looked like. This slide shows that enclosure now built out from neighbouring properties. So the left-hand one is looking back onto the hotel rear elevation. And I've included an aerial view as I think that's quite helpful. Again, the yellow arrows there show you the existing enclosure. Back in spring of last year, residents started to make complaints about noise coming from these units. It was apparent that they were audible to a number of residential properties backing on to the hotel. Our noise and nuisance team visited these properties and agreed and concluded that the units were causing a statutory noise nuisance. As such, an abatement notice was served back in July last year. And this notice required the hotel to take steps to address this and reduce the noise back down to acceptable levels. So this is what the application before you this evening seeks to do. The acoustic enclosure that you saw in the previous photographs and in that top left photo would be replaced with a new, larger acoustic enclosure. We're told it needs to be larger in order to achieve the attenuation measures required. It would be 45 centimetres higher and 70 centimetres wider than what you can see there. The location would remain the same. The same noise and nuisance officer who visited the site and served the notice has reviewed the acoustic information that's been provided with the application, specifically looking at the new enclosure and whether it's suitable, and they have concluded that provided it is installed as suggested, it would deal with the noise nuisance and bring the noise levels from these back to an acceptable standard. And a reminder of what that standard means for the residents who previously heard the equipment. The standard requires the units, when operating, to be lower in terms of the noise they emit than the background noise levels. So when properly operating and within the new enclosure, residents will not be able to hear the units. And that's the presentation for you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So we have two objectors speaking, Councillor Wade and Ms Bonifou. Thank you for joining us. So when a local councillor is speaking, the rules are slightly different. So the local councillor gets 2 minutes and the rest of the objectors, in this case just the one, gets 3 minutes. And we have no applicants or agents speaking on this. So I'll start with Councillor Wade. Councillor Wade, you have 2 minutes.
I defer to Madam first.
Ms Bonifou, 3 minutes, okay, whenever you're ready.
So, yeah, I'm Mrs. Bonafou. I'm the owner of the house with the garden that is adjacent to this air conditioning unit. So, we had a good context of the story of this problem. I mean, we are, all the residents nearby, really supportive to find a solution, even if we are really convinced that in the first place this should have never been in a conservation area in the back gardens. Reading the application, I think there are 2 points that are being overlooked, and I would like them to be further studied or get confirmation. First is the increase in height of the units. So indeed, there is a technical drawing as part of the application that mentions that the height would be increased by 45 centimeters. But it's a comment. And below on the drawing, this is not what we see. We see that there would be a total of 70 centimeter increase. So the main unit will be 40 centimeters increase, 30 centimeters increase in height. But then there is a kind of lid or cap or top, as you call it, which is 30 centimeters plus 10 centimeters, which bring the total above the 45 centimeters that I see. So I would like this to be confirmed because the comment in the application doesn't match the drawing. We built a fence, as you can see on the picture, to hide the existing units that are really ugly. This fence is 3.3 meters at the moment. So if we take the drawing into consideration, the new units will be 3 meters and 67 centimeters. 3 meters, 60 centimeters. It's more than a story building. It's really high. The second point is the acoustic report. So I read it as well, and I think that there's one point that is been overlooked as well. The conditions that are as well in the noise department report are the following ones. The noise emitted shall be measured at predicted shall be measured or predicted at 1 meter from the facade of the nearest residential window or at 1.2 meter above any adjacent residential garden, terrace, balcony or patio. This measure of the noise in the garden is not something that appears in the acoustic report from the engineer that are suggesting the solution to be worked on the acoustic box. So are we going, because as you can see, I've got a terrace that is not in the middle of the garden, so I want to be sure that the solution that they are proposing is going to make the noise at the level acceptable at this part of my property as well. So 2 points to summarize. The height, I mean, if it's going to be above our fence, I want them to screen it themselves. And the second point, I want to be sure that the solution they propose is going to make the noise acceptable in my garden. Honestly, we cannot use the garden at the moment. It's too noisy. It's terrible. Although they are unbelievable, the garden. We really should preserve them, you know.
Thank you very much. and we'll come on to give the committee a chance to ask you questions in a moment. Firstly, Councillor Wade, you have...
Oh. It must be
lost a bit of light.
it's the effect that I have on planning
Yes.
applications. All right.
Stuns us. 2 minutes whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you. The issue with extraction units, their installation, location, and their impact on Earls Court Gardens has been going on since 2013. This was the year that the hotel ownership changed hands, and effectively we've been playing catch-up ever since, with a series of interventions and retrospective planning applications. This application merely endorses the fact that work can be done without planning consent within conservation areas and covered up later. For IHG to fail to comprehend the frustration of residents of the loss of visual amenity, noise from plant, no set times of usage, not being consulted, is inexplicable and unaccountable, as an introduction with the new management and the chair of the RA was made in January. So there was an opportunity for this application to be discussed. The plant is larger, above fence heights, that have been erected to disguise the eyesore. Where was the consideration of the visual impact on private spaces? Only in the report is assessed public spaces. I would ask this as application is turned down, that the applicant consults with the affected residents and find a way of disguising the acoustic covering, the covering at the cost of the increased height of the fencing. Why is the unit permitted to produce noise higher than the ambient street level in private gardens? That there is clear guidelines on times, the limiter for the extraction and the aircon system, and a fast-track 24/7 complaints procedure. This situation has gone on too long, people have tried too hard, and this particular hotel chain has refused to consult.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, questions for the objectors? Yes, Councillor Lowry.
Specifically on the noise point, from a planning policy perspective, is it your view that the noise that would be emitted is not compliant, just specifically from our local plan perspective? Sure. Feel free to expand as much as you wish.
I think the problem is the onus has been left to the residents to chase environmental health, because this hotel chain has changed its configuration on its kitchen. It installed plant on the roof without planning consent. That was in 2013. That then got retrospective planning consent in about 2014, going back on my notes. And yet we had odours being projected into bedrooms. We had noise which made it really difficult for people to enjoy their gardens and their homes. Then it has just been one fight after another. Surely it's possible, if it's meant to be a good operation, to work out, one, that you realize that you're in a conservation area, or we're permanently eroding the value of the status of a conservation area. You're not respecting the rights and privileges of people who have bought into an area and expect to have the privilege of being able to open their bedroom windows. The noise was actually interfering with children's sleep. They couldn't they couldn't use their gardens. You know, and for them to this is the reason for my frustration is that for nearly 10 years we have actually been trying to work with this particular business to come up with a viable solution. And yet what we have is, oh, well, we're going to put another housing on, and then, oh, they'll forget to put the limiters, or somebody will go off duty. We've really got to nail it down, and they haven't nailed it down. I'm sorry.
So, Councillor Wade, there are obviously a number of frustrations here with the hotel in question. Looking specifically, though, about what we can do tonight, because obviously we can't solve every problem tonight.
I mean,
the new, sorry, 1 second. The new housing is supposed to, and to be compliant, it has to deal with the noise issue and bring it within legal limits. What conditions would you like to see us add to improve the situation?
right, number one, it's got to be a different colour. Why has it got to be that glary white colour? All right, because you're looking down, there are about 4, 5 houses that are looking, I mean, it is so big, Chair, that you're actually 4 or 5 houses and all the bedrooms are looking down on it. They're good-sized gardens, but they're not really super long gardens, so they're looking down on it. So that's number one. Number two, this place has actually, this solution has got to work. If it doesn't work, we have to have the mechanism 24/7 for there to be a telephone number within the organisation that it actually stops. Because in summer, actually, if it goes after 3 o'clock and people can't get hold of noise and nuisance team, they've got to be able to say, stop the equipment working. That's definitely something. Because I think there was one particular summer where we couldn't get hold of anybody from noise and nuisance and it just went on. There's got to be resident communication with the organisation. I set up a meeting with the new manager and the chair of the RA in January. He said, oh, I'll get round to it at some stage. He should have actually gone back to the RA. He should have been aware of the history of this problem, met them, had the decency to talk to the people before this application was put in. So the communication has to be improved, and I would suggest that this is done on a quarterly basis until people are satisfied.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Lowry.
Finally, from the visual aspect, I mean, I think that glaring white colour, I probably agree with you, isn't too satisfying. But what condition regarding colour or sort of screening would you, if you were on this committee, wish to implement?
I think this has got to be done in consultation with the residents who are directly going to look over it. This has got to be something that the residents, I mean, these are expensive houses, all right? These people have taken enormous pride in their houses, and they don't want to have to look down on this, and bearing in mind that they've fought for so long to get the improvement, I would have said this was a cut and paste solution, and I don't think it's satisfactory. But if we've got to know that there's a mechanism, if it's still noisy, that something happens immediately. But the colour's got to change, and I think that's in consultation with residents.
Could I ask Ms. Bonafou what her opinion is on this? Given it's going to be made, the decision will be made tonight out of my hands personally, but what is your view on this question?
The color doesn't help, certainly, but the bulkiness as well. I mean, I want to have a clear view on the dimension. For the moment, for me, it's not clear at all what is presented. I don't want to wake up one day and have a box that is 40 centimeters higher than my fence. I mean, it's not possible. Ideally, honestly, you can see that there are buildings on both sides of this portion of garden or whatever you call it on the hotel side. They should have built a proper room, you know, and then we would have flat roof everywhere and no noise, I guess, or less noise than with this kind of material.
But what if we say, let's say, brown, for example?
Brown can be ugly as well. So I mean,
I think in conversations before, when we've talked about it, there was a kind of we talked about dark, which was going to be appropriate. But again, I say that should go back to the residents.
Yeah,
I think most effective.
I think we'll probably go. We'll discuss with officers in a moment, but we'll probably go something along the lines of the colour and materials to be officers would have to agree it in discussion with residents or in consultation with
Okay.
residents, something along those lines, I think.
Chair, there's
Yeah.
also the additional thing of the height of the fences. The residents had increased the height of their fences to cover the original increased height, and now they're having to increase them again.
Yes, understood, thank you. Any other questions? Should we move on to the next part of the meeting? So, questions to officers. Councillor Woodger.
So I understand, if let's say we didn't approve this application, the current AC unit doesn't meet, it is too loud, from my understanding, which is why we're covering it up. So let's just, a scenario where we didn't approve this application, what would happen to the current AC unit?
It's a very good question. I wouldn't be able to give you a definitive answer. There is obviously the abatement notice.
I'm guessing it would just have to be turned off and it couldn't function.
Yeah, there's the abatement notice in place. We could also take planning enforcement action. It is complicated because of the 2013 approval for the units, although there was the condition on that to require them to meet the standards, and clearly they're not. But I can't see a scenario where, for example, they have to be removed.
Yeah.
Because there will always be the possibility for them to take measures to comply with that condition. That permission remains live. As it were.
with the previous live permission, if the AC unit was actually replaced with, say, the same unit, just hypothetical, and it did meet, obviously, sound requirements, no permission would be required because it's already got permission, if you see what I mean. But do you need permission, if you replace the unit, do you need permission to do that if it's the same unit?
I don't think permission would be needed to replace the question.
That's
to
what I'm trying to
within the existing enclosure, would planning permission be required to replace the equipment? I'd be inclined to say no, as long as it still met the conditions that were applied to the original permission.
Okay. So in terms of what's sitting in front of us, this because there's a big discussion about the size of the unit, and I'm guessing it's my understanding it's bigger because it's too loud, so the size is to cover that. Right, and then there's odd discussion about the colour and amending it that way, which I understand. Okay, yeah, that was my main question about what happens if we don't approve this.
Just a detail for the context as well.
I'm very sorry. Yeah, we can't interact any further with residents in this part of the meeting, much as we would like to, but procedurally we just can't do it. I apologise. Yes, Councillor Woodger.
Is this normal in terms of a unit coming back with a larger cover? I've never seen an AC unit come back with a larger cover before on a planning committee. Is this normal? Is this part and parcel?
I'll be honest, I haven't seen this type of scenario before. You'll be very familiar with the condition that we put on planning permission for AC units, and that's normally done with the benefit of understanding the acoustic structure that will be in place. And we do so with the belief that the acoustic enclosure proposed under the original application would suffice and do the job. Clearly here, it's not.
So if we thought that the original AC unit size was good enough, they need to get an AC unit which actually meets the sound requirements within the space, the physical space. In theory, we could hold our ground and say, actually, no, we don't want to approve this because it's too big, and what was previously approved is big enough.
In theory, if that was your belief, then yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I have a couple of questions about other conditions suggested by Councillor Wade. Could we add conditions around, she talked about making sure that the business was contactable if it was too loud, that they sort of regularly communicate with residents to check that it's not.
I have huge sympathy with Councillor Wade and the residents, and you know, when you hear that the noise and nuisance team haven't been available at all times, clearly as a council we would like to be doing better than that, but I would caution that we shouldn't be using planning conditions to try and deal with that scenario. The NPPF is clear about what planning conditions are for. They need to meet the conditions tests, they need to be reasonable related to planning and enforceable. I'm not sure a condition could achieve what Councillor Wade is asking to be achieved, as much as I agree with the
So we need to rely on the noise and nuisance team to contact the business as they have been doing by the sounds of things in the past, although obviously there has been continued disruption to residents. And just on the materials and colour and sort of potential screening and that sort of thing, presumably we could put on a condition to say that colour, etc., is to be agreed with officers, and officers should consult with residents.
Yeah, I'd actually caution trying to be too particular and suggest it should be a green or a brown, that we then have issues in terms of enforceability of that. So that would be the way around it, to ask for details. And you could put an informative on saying that that should be informed via discussions with the residents.
So I think, oh yeah, sorry, Councillor Woodger, go ahead.
Sorry, to go on about the size. How much bigger is it, like percentage-wise? I mean, compared to the original AC unit?
I wouldn't be able to give you a percentage. I'm afraid my math isn't good enough, but I have just had another look at the drawings just to confirm, because all the submission does talk about a 45 centimetre increase in height, but looking at the drawings, I think it is a bit misleading. There is almost like a little hat above it, above that. So according to my maths at least, it would be 60 centimetres higher than the existing structure.
Right. And the existing structure is how tall?
Sorry?
The existing structure is how tall?
2.8 metres tall.
Okay.
Can we condition screening to cover the height increase if this were to be approved?
So you'd like to apply a condition to suggest that further screening to the boundary should be introduced?
Yeah, as a protective measure visually.
I think that would be reasonable. Again, I wouldn't want to dictate what that should be or look like, but we could ask for that by way of condition.
But could the phraseology of the conditions towards colour and screening be sort of emphatic towards the consultation with residents, so that the delegated decision made by officers isn't suddenly against the crux of what they've been arguing tonight, for example?
Yes, as I say, we could put an informative on to advise that anything that came forward would need to demonstrate that it was informed through discussions with residents.
Okay.
One more question. If we refused the application and it went to appeal and it was won on appeal, then am I right in saying that any additional conditions that we recommend tonight actually wouldn't be tied to that application because we refused it, so we wouldn't add any conditions, and therefore if it won on appeal it would win without those additional conditions?
That's a possible scenario. We would of course have the opportunity to prepare a statement of case, and we could suggest additional conditions, but it would be down to the individual inspector as to whether or not they wanted to put those on. So yes, that is a risk. That is,
I think, is a risk we need to bear in mind. It's always a slightly odd situation, but one we need to be conscious of. Right, colleagues. So I think the first thing which is clear is that we would like to see conditions on, as discussed, regarding details of screening and colour and materials to be submitted and agreed with officers, and an informative that those should demonstrate that they have been done in consultation with residents. So is that okay? We'll add that to the conditions and the informatives. And on that, we should probably take a vote. The recommendation is to grant. Councillor Woodger.
To reluctantly grant.
Councillor Lowry.
To grant with those conditions.
Yeah. And I will also vote to grant. So that is passed with the additional conditions discussed. Thank you very much, Ms. Bonifay, for joining us this evening. We now move on to the ground floor flat, 8 Holland Park Avenue, and I think that's Mr. Taylor to present.
Right. This is an application seeking planning permission for the formation of a ground floor balcony, or I'll word it differently, a rear balcony to the ground floor flat at number 8 Holland Park Avenue. And I'll take you through some slides just to illustrate the two images I'm showing you there. On the left-hand side, you can see the front of number 8 Holland Park Avenue.
The presentation isn't coming up anymore on the screen behind you. Okay. I don't know if we can... Oh, Tom's up there trying to fix it. Oh, right, yeah. It just needs to be moved across. There we go. That's it. Okay, would you mind restarting, if that's okay? No. Thank you.
So on the left is the front elevation, but as you'll have seen from the report, the proposals basically affect the rear. The right-hand image is an aerial image which shows number 8 Holland Park Avenue identified with the little red box with number 8 in it. And to the bottom part of that photograph, you see where it backs onto Ladbroke Walk. Somewhat confusingly, the photograph is taken sort of the wrong way round. The Ordnance Survey map in your pack correctly shows Ladbroke Walk as being to the north of the property. But in the photograph, the north is at the bottom and south is at the top. And the next image shows the rear of number 8, the application property, as seen from within its own garden. So that view sort of roughly approximates to the view that you would see from the rear of Ladbroke Walk, looking towards the property. And you can see that the lowest flat in the building already has the decked garden that you see at the bottom of the image. And then you'll see that there's a rear extension running across the width of the property. And that rear extension basically is divided into sort of roughly 2 halves. There's the part that has the single window above it to the left of the image, and then there's the part that has the larger windows above it to the right-hand side. And that is the position that it's proposed to install a balcony. You'll see that there's already a balcony on the property on the floor above it, but the proposed balcony is basically beneath that existing balcony that you can see there. And then in drawing terms, that's the existing elevation on the left and the proposed elevation on the right. And you can see there that the proposed elevation now includes the balcony situated immediately beneath and in front of the balcony existing at the level above. It's also useful to see that the neighbouring property there, number 10, already has balconies, including one at the same level as proposed now for number 8. And then in plan form, that shows the rear of number 8, and you can see there the sort of central room in the plan, or the left-hand room in number 8, now has the balcony proposed to its rear with a single door leading out to it. And then in section terms, that shows the lower ground floor flat that you saw in the photograph with the decked garden, and then the ground floor flat immediately above it with the proposed balcony now proposed to its rear. And that's just a closer-up image to show the depth of the balcony and how the balcony would relate to the garden beneath. And then that's a closer-up image of the proposed rear elevation. So you can see there the existing balcony that would be above the proposed balcony, and then the neighbour's balcony to number 10 on the right-hand side. And that's the last slide, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Right, we have speakers both for the applicant and the and objectors on this case. We'll start with the objectors. Do we have Henrietta Foster and Liz Ellerton with us here this evening? Hello. Right, so you have, thank you for joining us. You have 3 minutes to share between you, and as I mentioned previously, I have to be sort of fairly strict on that, so I apologise for that. But 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
I'm a long-term local of 40 years and have lived in this area all my life. For the last 12 years, I have lived in the quiet and peaceful mews behind 8 Holland Park Avenue. I appreciate that the developers, stroke owners, have listened to past objections and have made concessions. However, I strongly object to this application for the following reasons. Currently, there are 2 outside spaces at 8 Holland Park Avenue. This would make 3. It's only a matter of time before the 2nd floor reapplies for their balcony. The combination of 3 or 4 balconies is like 4 houses worth of noise focused behind me, 4 times the disturbances. Only 2 of the 19 houses on this stretch of Holland Park Avenue are flats. Therefore, all the references to the surrounding balconies are very different. The chipping away at this building adversely affects me and my quality of life, and I believe this application would therefore contravene the CL5 of the local plan with unnecessary noise and privacy. The cumulative impact is the issue. The proposed balcony is not really in alignment with the 1st floor due to the depth as seen by the lower ground floor flat roof. It's twice as big and therefore will be like having numerous people in my bedroom at night, and it's a shame that the officers couldn't visit the site to see what I'm referring to. There's been no consideration to minimize this from behind, only from the sides. Would it be possible to add shielding to the rear? The back has really been ignored in the design and access statement even after the first refusal, and I beg the Council to reconsider this application. However, if you're minded to grant approval, I would really appreciate it if you would help to protect my peace and quality of life by asking for conditions which would mitigate the overall noise and disturbance.
I live at number 6 Holland Park Avenue. My family's lived there for 50 years. It is, of course, in our opinion, the best house in the entire Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and we love it as a home. We are also, of course, between the 2 multi-occupancy houses in Holland Park Avenue. In the past, that's never been a problem because the outside space at number 4 Holland Park Avenue is for the ground floor and the maisonette, and number 8, although it has always been 4 flats, the outside space was constricted to the back garden. I have 3 objections: noise, privacy and security. Noise, 4 layers of noise. A balcony is not an open window. It's a lot more noise that we have to deal with. We've already had quite a lot of noise from the 1st floor balcony where the windows are open and we hear the noise throughout the night. That's not really acceptable in a small constricted area of gardens. In terms of privacy, what that photograph does not show is the length of that balcony goes straight into our garden. There's been a very dirty bed on it for the past 2 years, and we can see it directly from our garden. And that they can see us. A little flimsy bit of trellis is not going to protect us. They look directly on to our garden. 3rd point, security. Our garden, on the side of our wall, are steps going down from our balcony into our garden. Anybody, and bearing in mind it's a tenanted property, it's an absentee landlord with a tenanted property, he can go down they can go over, down onto our stairs and have direct access to our property. We're not really happy about that. Might I propose a solution very quickly?
Sorry, we've finished the time, but I'm sure a committee member might well ask you about a solution in the questions section. We now move on to, we're joined by Mr. McLean. Hello, for the applicant. You also have 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is William McLean and I own the flat at 8 Holland Park Avenue. The purpose of my application is to provide a small area of much needed external space. I'd very much appreciate the ability to sit out on the occasion and enjoy some fresh air, similar in manner indeed to those enjoyed by many of my neighbours, particularly in the current environment we've all been through for the last 2 years. I'd initially submitted a proposal for a larger balcony covering the full width of the flat roof, but withdrew this application in July last year when I became aware of the concerns arising from my neighbours regarding its size and also from your officers in terms of design and appearance on a full balcony. In discussions with officers, I was advised that a balcony of reduced size, aligning with the existing 1st floor balcony above my property, would be appropriate in this case. The application I've now submitted follows this fully, and a 50% reduction has been applied. I respectfully do not believe that the concerns raised by my neighbours are justified. Firstly, I propose to erect timber trellis screens to both sides of the balcony, preventing any close views of my neighbour's terrace at number 6 or across the party boundary at number 10. In terms of concerns regarding relationships with Ladbroke Walk to the rear, I'd endorse the assessment made by your officer, paragraph 6.6 of his report. Here he quite correctly explains that there are already a considerable number of balconies at higher levels all along the rear of Holland Park Avenue. Some in more prominent positions than which I propose, including one directly above my own flat. The officer's assessment of these terraces and balconies therefore cause a substantial degree of mutual overlooking between Holland Park Avenue and Ladbroke Walk properties. There are also many windows to the rear elevations of the houses and flats on both sides, which result in intervisibility and direct overlooking into garden areas. My proposed balcony will be very modest in scale and set at a lower level, so far less prominent and visible than many of the existing balconies, terraces and larger windows. In terms of the use of the balcony and concerns regarding noise and disturbance, I again agree with the officer's assessment of paragraph 6.8 of the report, which is that given its modest nature and its position at the ground floor level, the small amenity space would not result in any harm to or a worsening of the amenity currently enjoyed by my neighbours. For this reason, I do not believe that any neighbours should experience a material increase in overlooking or suffer a noticeable loss of privacy. The existing relationships would not materially change. In summary, I do believe the amended proposal, as guided by your officers, is reasonable and would not result in generally harmful impacts. It would, however, be of significant help to me, allowing me to sit out on occasions when the weather allows. I do hope you may feel able to support the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we now have the opportunity to ask questions of the objectors or the applicant. Colleagues, Councillor Woodger.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the objectors was just getting towards the end of their speech was mentioning I think a potential solutions or amendments. Do you want to finish your point on
Yes, that's very kindly. Thank you, Councillor Woodger. First of all, I'd like to point out this gentleman does not live there. He lives there in my mother's county of Shropshire. That's 3 and 4 hours away from where this flat is. It's a rented property. Secondly, my solution is number 4 Holland Park Avenue during the pandemic decided that people did need outside space. So the people that owned the maisonette, the ground and the basement let their neighbours in the first and second floors use the front garden as a place where they could eat, they could sit, they could read, they could use it as a garden. They've continued to do this, even though, well, let's hope the pandemic is over, but they have continued to, and it's been a very successful solution. It's a much bigger space. They have a certain amount of privacy because they have trees and bushes. They could do that very easily in number 8, where they have a very large garden in front, like our garden, and they could bring tables and chairs there. We wouldn't necessarily object to that, and we haven't objected to the ones at number 4. That seems to me like something that's much more adequate than a very unnecessary balcony that will obviously spill out onto the rest of the roof terrace when they have parties there.
Okay. Just a follow-up my question. It's an interesting idea, but specifically my question is about amendments. If you could amend this application, how would you amend it?
Well, we can both do
you or any object?
My amendment would be to say no, because I think it's unacceptable.
And I would just add that an amendment would be some consideration from your point of protection from the back, because the man behind me doesn't realize that I face on exactly, it doesn't represent it in that picture there. I mean, I did send another picture in with your packet, which actually shows what my bedroom window looks onto, which is the lower ground floor, the first and the second. And with 3 balconies on top of my bedroom, it's going to be extensive noise and disturbance.
So I'm trying to clarify what do you mean by protection from the back? What does that actually mean?
I live on Ladbroke Walk, which is directly behind this property. And the photograph you'll have in your packet, which is the same one, shows, you've shown it from the garden, but from my window, I'm like right on top of it. And so by the extension...
So how do you amend the application?
Yeah, so I was saying some kind of consideration. You got trellises on either side, some I can't give you the exact material, but maybe a screen or some kind of shielding from my aspect, as well as the sides, would be more accommodating to, you know, I mean,
If we go back to the last slide, where you see the tree, that, I mean, in terms of an amendment, where that tree is on our property, where the far end of that roof extension, this is a very badly taken picture, there should be some kind of trellis, or not trellis, some kind of wall, actual wall, that would mean that our property could not look at all into that, because it has a direct view down into our garden and obviously onto our balcony.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense to you? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand. Just my final question, which is to the applicant, in terms of listening to these potential amendments, are any of these amenable to you? Are these durable? I mean, is this something you would consider, potentially?
I mean, I'd prefer not to have the one on the back of the balcony for the simple reason, actually. If we could go back to the photograph, if I may, that shows, that one there. The original balcony went across all of the building. I considered, when I saw the objections from the lady on the right, number 4, I think it is, and we reduced the balcony by 12 feet. So it is nowhere near overlooking that property.
It is. It is. I'm sorry.
Sorry, but I've been out and had a look. You cannot actually see into the garden.
I've lived in the house for 50 years, Mr. McLean.
Well,
sorry,
it is overlooking my...
Sorry, we can't. I apologise. We can't have back and forth between residents, but we've heard the points you've made. Sorry, Mr. McLean, please continue.
Sorry, if I may go back to that photograph again, Mr. Taylor. Thank you. Therefore, the balcony actually finishes now in the middle, where the drain pipe, the downpipe, comes down. That is some considerable distance, and that's what I took into consideration when the first application was advised would not be accepted. So I withdrew the application, took the points raised by the officers and the objectors, and reduced it significantly in size. It is now, in effect, a balcony that goes from where I sit here to about a foot short of this table, and is 4 feet wide. I can fit 2 chairs and a small table with a bottle of wine on it. That is all it is. It is simply an outside space. So I think the second point about noise is actually not appropriate in this case. Equally, the building to my left, recently refurbished some 2 years ago, over 2 years.
Just to make clear, I think the question was regarding conditions, so if you could just make sure you confine your views to...
Yes, I mean, I think by putting the side screens up, and the fact it's on the ground floor does meet the requirements, as was recommended by the officer's advice that we took.
Thank you. Councillor Wade.
The issue of security has been raised. I'd like to ask the applicant a couple of questions. Do you rent this property?
It is currently renting. I'm returning to London in the next 4 months. I'm an ex-soldier. I'm now coming back to London to live in London. But recently it's been rented for a number of years. It has been rented. The top floor, the top floor hasn't. I think that it's fair to say that if you have a balcony to a balcony, that actually a trellis is something that could be breached. So I think that it's reasonable to ask whether, if one's thinking about materials, whether or not the materials of the trellis on either side could be something which could be made more secure. Have you thought of that? I could certainly...
I mean, not just kind of something you get from Wicks.
I understand exactly what you're saying. Having, as I said, I do feel it is secure because there's a considerable drop from the end of that terrace to the neighbour's property next door. Well, there is. You can see it by the tree.
The other question is, I couldn't get a sense of the distance between your property and Labrook Walk. I mean,
so the garden below me, the basement flat, is, I would say, at a guesstimate about 20 to 25 feet long, to a wall that is in the objectors back of the objectors. So that is only showing it actually goes back considerably further than that. I mean, I don't know if Mr. Taylor has the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's something we might want to raise again with officers in the next part. Councillor Lowry.
I do concur on the security aspect, but what about planting? What if planting was so dense and so high that it would make this balcony invisible, but also, given it's dense, impractical for someone to breach it? If this were approved, is that a potential condition that might alleviate some concerns?
I mean, I think the simple solution would be to...
I was asking Ms. Allison.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I mean,
And Ms. Foster.
it would be if it was on the two sides plus behind. There's been no consideration. The two things that there's been no consideration that I've heard tonight is from the back at all, and I face 4 flats. So this is the third of potentially 4 balconies that are going to be right on me. And either side, as Henrietta said, are houses. In fact, of the 19 houses, there's only 2 houses that are flats. And I appreciate the gentleman's request to reduce the size, but he reduced the size basically because you gave guidance on the last application, pre-planning advice to make it smaller, and the first one was rejected with over 20 objections from the Muse. This one is smaller, and I appreciate that, but if he could build something around 3 aspects of it, you know, the back as well as the sides would be fine.
Can I add, on our side, we cannot plant on our side of the wall, the party wall, because our side of the party wall are steps. So there's no, the tree is fine, but there's a whole chunk where the tree is that goes straight into our garden from that level. If he could work out some way of having a heavy-duty plant on the far end of the eastern end of the roof terrace, that would make it much easier for us, because we wouldn't actually see them and they wouldn't see us.
Yes.
Okay, so dense planting on the eastern end.
Yeah, but it would have to be on his side, not on our side, because there is no earth that we could plant there. So
I think just very quickly, Councillor, I see the point you're getting at, and we can discuss this with officers, but I don't think we can require planting in planning purposes, because you know, a plant can die and then it would become in breach of planning. And so we can check with officers, but we can suggest it, but I don't think we can require planting, unfortunately.
Or something more substantial than a bit of trellis.
Understood. Thank you. Any other questions? No, okay. In which case, thank you, all 3 of you, for your comments and your answers. Have been very useful. We move on to questions to officers. Colleagues, Councillor Wade.
It's about the materials. Could we specify what materials are used for the trellis for the side? I'm just concerned that if the concern is about security, that if it was kind of one of these trellises which was flimsy.
Yeah, I think it's security and opacity are the 2 concerns on this, aren't there?
Yes, certainly. I think, I'd say a couple of things in relation to security and then a couple of things in relation to overlooking. In terms of security, I actually think it's a bit of a red herring. I think anybody could easily, if they were so minded, access a neighbouring property from a flat roof or from a balcony. And whether a balcony has trellises at the side or not, you can just hop around the outside of it. Anyone who is determined would access from the flat roof one way or another, with or without trellises. So I don't think trellises would really make a lot of difference. They may make it slightly harder to move around from one part of the property to another, but they wouldn't stop anything. And even a solid screen wouldn't stop someone swinging around the outside of it. So I don't think security is particularly a significant factor in terms of the balcony. No, I understand that, but it exists already with the flat roof.
I'm sorry, yes.
So I think that the flat roof already presents some security concerns. I would not suggest the balcony actually changes that in any material planning sense. In terms of the screens at the side, certainly trellises would allow some view through, unless you have a solid trellis that wouldn't. There are other sorts of screens. For example, you could have a more modern screen that could be in opaque glass or some opaque material that you couldn't see through at all. And they're frequently found on buildings. Victorian buildings could still have a modern style screen on each side of the balcony. I don't think the fact it's a Victorian building would mean that the screening would have to be trellis work. I mean, a modern screen with completely opaque sides to it on each side would achieve the complete blocking of view and would still be acceptable on a Victorian building. I think particularly this building, it's been quite altered in the past. And you've got a very modern extension immediately beneath it. So there may be situations, particularly on a listed building, when you might argue that opaque glass screens wouldn't be acceptable. But I think they would be acceptable here, and I think a condition could require those. And that would completely avoid overlooking through the trellis. Using planting to screen a balcony, I mean, words like dense planting would be almost impossible to enforce. I do remember a condition many years ago which used the words dense planting or something similar to it, and the neighbours were forever saying it's not dense enough, and the enforcement officer was in an almost impossible position. So I would certainly caution against any sort of dense planting. Really, if privacy is a concern, then an opaque screen that you simply can't see through would be the most effective way to deal with that. Another point I think I would suggest is that we have heard concern, well, if there's a balcony, then someone could hop over the balcony onto the rest of the flat roof. A condition could be added that would preclude any use of the remainder of the roof as an amenity space. And that's a commonly attached planning condition. And that would go some way to answering that. In terms of a trellis or screen across the rear, my recommendation would be that if you found the risk of overlooking to be that bad, then you should refuse planning permission. I don't think a screen across the rear as well would be reasonable. I mean, it would create an outside space, but not one with much amenity value. To screen it across three sides, you'd effectively create a box without a roof on it. And I think if the concerns about overlooking were that bad, then I'd suggest you should probably refuse planning permission rather than have three screens and just an open top box within it. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Colleagues, other questions? Yes, Councillor Wade.
I think my concern is about the fact that this has been used as a rental property, and though rental properties are quite difficult to manage from long distance, and that management is just generally difficult of these types of properties, and it's very difficult to attribute to which flat might be causing the problem. Is there any way we could put a condition on the fact that if it was for long-term use rather than...
I think the answer is going to be no, but I will... Because any property can become a rental property.
I'm just thinking of the scenario that it could be Airbnb, not an AST. Do you know what I mean? That it's... rentals have changed, and therefore, if we're looking at this as what it could be in the future, which is, I understand how you meant to view a planning, what we have in front of. I think that the fact that this has been let for some time, and it could potentially therefore be in the future, what safeguards can we put in?
Even if it was occupied by the owner and had been for 100 years, a day after we grant planning permission, it could become a rental. So we do have to consider all potential uses in mind when granting planning. But are there any conditions we can put on type of use or I'm assuming not of the whole property, but of the balcony? Is there anything that can be attached?
I think you probably anticipated my answer, Chairman, but the answer would be no. I mean, the fact it's a residential property, the fact that it's rented or lived in by whoever makes no difference. It's a residential property. The land use is residential, and the precise nature of tenure really isn't a material planning consideration. I think, I mean, conditions, as I say, relating to the use of the roof very much are a material consideration, but who occupies the property or on what basis are not material planning considerations.
So the only real protection we'd have against Airbnb use, whether it was that balcony or indeed any other outside space, would be environmental health and noise and nuisance teams rather than planning permission conditions. Councillor Lowry.
It's been noted that there are other balconies nearby, but also that many of these are part of original features in keeping with the original architecture. So my question is about new balconies. Are there any recent examples of other new balconies that have popped along in this stretch, or are the majority part of a sort of original pre-modern era, sort of in keeping with the original architectural intent of the sort of Regency era, if you get the drift of my question?
Yes, I do understand the question. I mean, I would go as far as to say in answer that I don't think any of the balconies that you can see there in the drawings would be original. I mean, they've all been added through the lives of the buildings. I mean, the Victorians tended not to build balconies on rear extensions like that, or in front of double highs infill conservatories either. I mean, all the balconies that you see there have been added. They're not originals. And that there wouldn't be anything to say in planning terms that a building of this type should not have a balcony.
Although we can take into account cumulative effect.
Yes,
that is a planning consideration.
Cumulative effect is definitely a material consideration. Mm-hmm. I mean, there'd be two ways to look at this. I mean, I think one way to look at it is that we are already overlooked. We're already overlooked by the windows and the balconies that you see there. It's a sort of straw that broke the camel's back argument, and to add more overlooking on top of that is simply a step too far. So that's one way to look at it in a cumulative sense. The other argument that you will come across a lot in town planning is, would this particular development, or the balcony that's being proposed here, would it actually create a problem that doesn't already exist? Would it create something over and above what could anyway occur? And I think the planning officer's view here is that clearly mutual overlooking does occur. And there's a lot of potential for noise or other disturbance already, purely from gardens and balconies that do exist. And so the planning officer assessment is that there'd be unlikely to be any impact that couldn't otherwise occur in the existing context. But as I say, there are two ways to look at that.
I think that's a very helpful summary. No other questions? Well, I think, yeah, that's a decision, in short, sort of in front of us. Does the cumulative impact of adding another balcony, when there are already balconies, but does adding another one make the sort of go too far and make the level of overlooking or the level of noise unacceptable? Yeah, it's not an obvious decision. I think there's very good arguments in both directions, but I think we need to move to a vote. So the recommendation is to grant. Councillor Woodger?
To grant, Chair.
Councillor Lowry?
To refuse. Can I expand?
Briefly.
Well, as a borough, we're supposed to be implementing a new emerging local plan. We're entering a new municipal cycle. I do not believe cumulative developments such as this, which clearly impact on privacy, noise, and neighbours, is the sort of thing that we should be proactive in supporting as a council. Okay. I think it's something that's really brought shame on Kensington and Chelsea, and I was alluding to this in the first application, but on that grounds I will refuse it.
Okay. Councillor Wade?
I refuse.
Refuse. Okay. And on balance, I will vote to grant. So that's...
Chairman, could I just... Sorry,
Yes, sorry,
to
Mr.
interrupt.
With the conditions, with the...
Could I just check the
conditions.
decision to grant, is that including the extra condition that
That was including the... Sorry, I should have clarified that. That was including the extra condition you suggested of opaque sides.
Well, there were two.
Sorry.
One was a condition which would actually preclude the use of the remainder of the roof as any sort of amenity space. And then the second suggestion was to have opaque screens at the sides.
Yes.
And if that was part of
So
the
that was my
committee's decision,
understanding, that
then
both
we'd
of
need to
those-
have details of the screens at the side in order to know exactly what they'd look like and also to know how opaque the glass would be.
Yeah. So that's how, so that was my understanding when I was voting. Councillor Woodger, was that your understanding as well?
Yes, it was mine.
Yes. Okay. Understood. So in which case, permission is passed with those additional conditions as laid out by Mr. Taylor. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all very much for your time.
No, what the hell is the point in coming to these meetings when you have people like
me.
Councillor Wade and Laurie who are making sensible applications and you two don't? It is quite incredible. It's a total waste of our time.
Okay.
Total waste of our time.
Thank you.
And you should be ashamed of yourselves.
We now move on to 44 Hands Road.
Something else you'll grant, no doubt.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, no wonder you say thank you. Go back to Shropshire and rent it out again to more people.
You've got a lovely big garden.
Yeah, yes, because we pay for it and we own it. Whereas you are building a shitty little boundary that will create enormous amounts of noise.
Ms. Harrell.
Thank you. Number 44 is a two-storey property on the south side of Hands Road. I've started the presentation just with these aerial photographs to show the relationship of the property with its neighbours. So it's the flat roof property I've circled there, and you can see the properties on Walton Place running perpendicular to that property. This is the existing front elevation, again just to note the flat roof. And this is the view of that flat roof from the rear. This is taken from properties on Walton Place. You can see the railings there on top of that flat roof. Planning permission is sought for 2 air conditioning units. Both would be housed in acoustic enclosures. You can see here on the plan there's one on the left-hand side next to the parapet and one which would be laid flat on the roof itself. Here in elevation, you can just about make out the top of one of the enclosures on the right-hand image. Of relevance to the decision and the recommendation before you was a recent appeal decision. In November, planning permission was granted by the inspectorate for a Mansard roof extension, an increase in the height of the parapet to the side. It hasn't been completed yet, but this is a mock-up just so you can understand how the property will look from the front. It's relevant as shown on this proposed rear, sorry, that should say side elevation. The side elevation, you can see the unit would be situated behind that new Mansard roof extension. Lastly, just showing you there from the rear this time, this is the rear elevation. You can see the 2 units, so again the one next to the parapet and the one lying flat. Both enclosures would be finished in a grey slate finish to match the slate of the roof, the Mansard roof behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We don't have any speakers, so straight to questions to officers, colleagues.
Are there any other views apart from that one?
Councillor Woodger.
Of the air conditioning, are there any other? Do we have any other views of the air conditioning units?
So there aren't any CGI mock-ups or anything.
Okay.
But there's, but materiality is something that we
Fine.
could condition if we were minded to.
Fine. Okay, that's it.
Councillor Wade.
Ms. Harrell, I'm looking at the proposed side elevation 1, and perhaps you could talk me through it because it seems to be taller on one side than proposed rear elevation, the second one. I'm looking at a different picture, which is showing the yeah, that's the one I'm looking at. So, can you just explain why the wall seems to be...
Which is the other drawing that you think there's a conflict between?
Sorry?
Which is the other drawing that you think there's
I'm looking at two drawings,
Yeah.
and the casing seems to be taller in one than it is in front of the French windows.
Oh.
And I'm just wondering why.
Which one, sorry?
Look, it seems that's quite high.
That is that one there.
All right, then, but why...
Is that side on? So
How visible is that from the street? Proposed side elevation 1.
So I don't believe it would be visible from the street at all.
I mean, I couldn't relate it to the pictures, if you know what I mean.
I don't think it would be visible from the street at all, given the Mansard roof extension that was allowed at appeal. It certainly would be visible in private views at the rear. So if I return to this photograph, there would be views across onto both the enclosures, particularly the one that is on its side. I think that's the one you're referring to. Yes, that would be visible in those views.
Trying to see that. Trying to work that. That's very messy at the back of the building, isn't it?
So that's a photograph from a neighbouring property.
So if you imagine the Mansard roof they have approval for, hopefully you can just about make out my cursor would sort of come to this area.
They've chosen it to be a grey to be in line with the roof.
So it's proposed to be powder coated in a slate grey colour to match the colour of the approved roof behind. If I go back to the rear elevation, that's probably easiest to... Sorry, this is jumping about for some reason. You'll see there the approved Mansard roof. So the idea is that the colour would match the finish of that roof.
All right. Well, I suppose they can hear the noise. Thank you.
Just to check, the views of it from the rear would... people's concerns would be about how it looks rather than blocking out any sunlight or views or anything like that.
Sorry, this is a jumping about for some reason. If I return to the aerial view, I think that's probably helpful. As I say, it shows the relationship between the immediate properties. So, as I said, on a couple of the properties on Wharton Place, there's no denying that you would be able to see it. It would be visible. But I think the orientation of the building and the size of the acoustic enclosures ensures that there would be no impact in terms of loss of light, daylight, sense of enclosure. The distance is that it would just be something new.
So the grey was chosen because of the people who will be overlooking it?
I'm not entirely sure why grey was chosen. I assume that the purpose behind it was to minimise the impact of it. You heard earlier, a lot of discussion about whether white is appropriate. The photographs of that enclosure certainly made it look particularly prominent. I suppose the argument here is a slate grey finish would be more discreet.
Could I suggest, just because slate grey could look good or could also not look good, could we just add a condition that the exact look of it to be sort of agreed with officers, so materials to be provided and agreed with officers, with the note that it should be as in keeping to the area as possible, or minimise the how much it stands out. Is that appropriate?
If members feel there's not enough information within the submission, then that of course is an option open to you. In terms of what it's looking like, I believe it is a metal enclosure, and then it would be powder coated. So I'm not sure how much more they could give us, but if you felt that we did need more, absolutely, that's within your gift.
I think it would just be good to make sure before they build it that officers see what it looks like, and there's, I think, a high chance it will look like as described, but just to make sure that sort of materials are seen before it's built. Makes sense. Would colleagues agree? Yeah. Yes, please. Any other questions? No. Okay. In which case, I think we'll proceed to a vote with the condition just agreed, and the recommendation is to grant. Councillor Woodger.
To grant, Chair.
Councillor Lowry.
To grant.
Councillor Wade. And I vote to grant, so that's unanimous to grant. We now move on to 16 Smith Terrace.
Thank you very much. Again, I'm going to start my presentation with an aerial photograph. The property forming the subject of this application is highlighted there with the red arrow. I've started with this slide just to highlight the existing rear elevation. You'll note that it has already been extended. The existing extensions are staggered with a step back at first and second floor level. Best understood in this existing section shown on the screen. So again, as I say, you can see the setback at first floor level, and then again at second floor level. There is an existing terrace at this level at the moment. Under the proposals, this terrace area would effectively be infilled, so the building line at second floor level would extend out to meet that of the first floor level below. This slide shows you the existing floor plan above and then the proposed below, again just showing the building line extending out. And then in elevation, again showing the extension, and note that there would be a Juliet balcony introduced to the new doors at that level. My last slide is just to help in terms of some of the references that have been made within the objections to a appeal decision at another property on Smith Terrace. This was at number 1 Smith Terrace. You'll note some of the objectors have highlighted the inspector's comments about rear extensions not being appropriate. I think it's important here to highlight the difference in the immediate context here. Smith Terrace is almost a terrace of two halves. The western end, as you can see in the left-hand photograph, has been heavily extended at the rear. There are a number of examples of similar extensions to that proposed at both first and second floor level, whereas the eastern end, where number 1, the appeal property is located, shown on the right-hand image, you'll see is very different, and the properties here don't really feature any rear extensions at all. So you'll note within the officer's comments to those objections, they have highlighted that the western end has been treated differently. And that's the presentation for you, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, no speakers. Excuse me, Councillor Wade.
Has there been a light impact study on the adjacent buildings for how much light is going to be cut out from either 17 or 15 with the introduction of this additional floor?
I don't believe we've seen a daylight sunlight report, nor have we requested one. I think officers considered it wasn't necessary in this instance. It's not always a requirement, and they were comfortable to make the recommendation that there would be no harmful impact in that regard without the need for a study.
Because they're quite narrow, these houses, and it's quite dense there, so I should imagine that could have been nobody's commented. I didn't see it, and I think it was just mainly that people feel that it's kind of overdevelopment of a workman's cottage.
I suppose I would just comment that both properties on either side, although not to the same extent as proposed, you can see from the left-hand photo, they both have their own rear extensions at second floor level as well as below. So perhaps that's led to them not being particularly concerned. I don't know.
just a consideration.
Colleagues, any other questions on this? No? Okay. In which case, we should proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to grant, and there are no additional conditions that we want to attach. Councillor Woodger.
To grant, Chair.
Councillor Lowry.
Abstain on this one.
Councillor Wade.
Refuse.
And I will vote to grant, so that's 2 to 1 with 1 abstention passes. We've been going 2 hours. I'm just going to call a quick 5-minute recess if anyone wants to relieve. Righto, I think we're all back now and ready to go again. Where do we get to? Park Walk Primary School. Sorry, 1 second. Okay.
Sorry, just
Not at all.
fiddling around with the slides. All good to go. Thank you. Just a couple of slides for you on this application. It's a pair of applications, planning permission and listed building consent. Just a photograph to start of the existing school. You'll note the windows at ground floor level. The application relates to some changes to those, and the existing railing at the front there. Under the proposals, the 4 openings highlighted in red in the top drawing would be amended, so the sills would be dropped on 2 of them, and 1 replaced with a window, so minor alterations to those. And then with regards to the railing at the front, 2 new modest gates would be introduced. These would be discrete and match the railings themselves. You can see the 2 highlighted there with the red circles. The rest of the works relate largely to the playground. There's some images here of the existing playground. It was actually opened by Brian Adams through the Brian Adams Foundation, I found out the other day. You'll see it's not your average playground, it's rather special, but there are some minor works just to change the landscaping and finishing of those. Other than that, there are some internal changes to the layout of the classrooms and so on, all of which have been reviewed by our heritage team, who are satisfied that none of them harm the significance of the listed building. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. No speakers, so colleagues, questions. Councillor Woodger.
It's not a question, it's got observation. So you've got no objections, but it's only been considered because it's made by the Rural Borough, which means it can't be done under delegated powers. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay,
Yep.
it's fine.
And I know the report says the Heritage Officer is happy with the proposals, and I think all the new materials should match existing materials. Is that correct?
That's correct, and we've seen details, for example, of the windows to ensure that the profile and the glazing bar details and so on match the existing and are appropriate for the building of that age and so on.
Okay, well it seems. Oh, sorry. Yes, Councillor Wade.
Have they taken the advantage of incorporating any environmental efficiencies at the same time as their double glazing or in the bars or anything like that?
I don't know, is my honest answer,
All
so
right.
I don't want to be misleading.
I just thought I'd ask.
I imagine, given it's a listed building, it's unlikely, but they may well have done, but often with listed buildings...
Because it's quite cold. It's quite cold on the ground floor in that school. And I just thought if they were replacing some of the windows, that actually they could have put double glazing in there, which might have helped some of the costs of running the school.
It's a reasonable point. I don't know if you want to just perhaps raise that independently of this meeting with the relevant council team.
I just think if we're doing something which is going to last quite a long time, we're not going to be. I mean, this is an expensive job, and therefore, is it possible to ask whether or not energy efficiency has been considered? They might
maybe we add an informative. Say we sort of encourage them to consider energy efficiency, including double glazing, if possible.
Yes.
Could we add that as an informative?
We could do it as an informative. As I say, I would caution necessarily promoting double glazing, as often it's not seen to be appropriate on a listed building. But I'm not a heritage expert in this case. I haven't been and visited those. I don't know if it would or wouldn't be appropriate.
Let's leave it at all energy efficiency options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you happy with that?
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay, in which case, proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to grant. Councillor Woodger.
Grant with enthusiasm, Chair.
Councillor Lowry. Councillor Wade.
Grant.
And I vote to grant, so that's unanimously passed.
There's the listed building consent.
Listed building consent order as well. So, yeah, we have to vote separately on that. So, again, the recommendation is to pass a listed building consent. Councillor Woodger.
To grant, Chair.
Councillor Lowry. Councillor Wade.
Grant.
And I vote to grant, so also unanimously passed. So we now move on to 46 Abingdon Road. Are we okay? No. Oh, sorry. Yes, we're in the north now, aren't we? No, sorry. Could we? Is it? Would it be a problem if we did 46 Abingdon Road and then St Luke's Mews? Sorry to change the plan, just because our two remaining residents are here to observe Abingdon Road. Sorry, I thought for some reason Abingdon Road was in the south pack, not the north pack.
Okay, that can be done. I was nearly over at St Luke's Mews, but I just need to go back.
That's my fault. I apologise.
You're good test of my technical skills.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
We're at 46 Abingdon Road. Okay, so this application is to amalgamate the two existing flats within the building. And I've really just got just two images to show you, because I think the report just explains everything else. Essentially, that's the application property identified by the red arrow at the centre of the photograph. So you can see immediately it was built as a family house. It's a Victorian building built as a house with in the form that you see there. It's now proposed to sort of re-amalgamate it effectively. Just to illustrate, I just included one floor plan, which I think again is fairly predictable, the sort of typical Victorian house arrangement. And it's basically a policy compliant amalgamation.
Councillor Lowry.
I mean, my obvious first question is looking at page 2 of the application. And I note the very nonchalant response of officers to the objection that this is one of 5 applications to amalgamate, and their response is that it is acknowledged. But, I mean, we acknowledge it, but there is a cumulative impact of multiple applications being considered for amalgamation, whereby I get what they're trying to say about the loss of one unit may not contribute in policy directly, but actually, when you consider all these things together, this is a material impact on our housing supply, and I don't know how we can just acknowledge it without taking into account the simultaneous applications. I mean, is each one of these going to be presented to a different committee and we'll have the same answer saying, oh, we just acknowledge it, but each to its own merit? Why aren't we considering these together is my first question.
Well, I mean, essentially, I totally understand the sort of direction of the question, but these are, as a matter of fact and as a matter of law, they are separate planning applications and they do relate to separate buildings. They may be under one owner and they may be coming forwards, roughly at the same time. But the ownership of the buildings in themselves is not a material planning consideration. I mean, legally they are separate buildings, and legally every planning application is a separate application to be judged on its own merits. So, I mean, anyone can work out, well, if it was one building or if there was one application, the answer might be different, but that's an if. They are separate buildings and they are separate applications.
Is there an administrative reason why we're not considering them all tonight? Why there's only one tonight? Like, what's the administrative reason for that?
No reason at all. I mean, the applications actually weren't submitted at the same time. I mean, they were submitted, you know, over a period of time. It may be that some of the others would come to the same committee. I mean, there's no reason to separate them, and there's no reason to put them together. As I say, they are sort of self-standing applications.
Councillor Woodger.
Thank you, Chair. To the officers, how do we balance, obviously, you've got loss of one dwelling. How do you balance benefit and harm for this application when there's potential loss of a dwelling?
It's the policy itself that balances harm against benefit. So, I mean, the housing policy in itself, in setting a threshold for amalgamation, is carrying out that balance between benefits and harm. I mean, in this case, if it was found that the amalgamation was outside the policy threshold, it might then be the case that sort of benefits could be balanced against that policy conflict. But in this case, there isn't a policy conflict. So the requirements, as you'll probably be familiar with, section 38.6, is that an application should be determined in accordance with the development plan, unless there were material considerations that indicated otherwise.
What is the threshold?
170 square metres.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, effectively, this was a debate when set in the previous local plan. On the one hand, by amalgamating two smaller units to a larger one, you might get a more sort of family-sized, or for a larger family unit, so there's some benefit, but then there's some loss as well. And so you've got to come to a compromise, and that's what the last local plan decided, that 170 square metres would be a compromise. The new local plan might come to a different compromise, but we've got to act based on the current local plan in law, which says 170 square metres. And this is 150.75 square metres. Any other questions? No. Okay, in which case we proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to grant. Councillor Woodger?
To grant, Chair.
Councillor Lowry?
To refuse.
Councillor Wade?
Abstain.
And I vote to grant, so that's 2-1 with 1 abstention. So we now, can we now do the jump through the pack, Mr. Taylor? Apologies, to 15 St Luke's Mews. Yes, you're recusing yourself from this one, aren't you? Yes.
You want me to leave
Well, it's probably best, sorry. Yeah, you can sit at the back there if you'd rather not sit at the...
take my minutes. Take my
Just might be confusing on the, you know, if anyone's watching recording or anything. Thank you.
Right, we're at 15 St Luke's Mews. You'll have seen from the report that this is proposing a replacement mansard extension with roof lights and a dormer window and other alterations. Just to make it absolutely clear, there is no roof terrace now proposed on top of this roof that there was at one point, but that's no longer part of the proposals. In fact, there's actually a condition recommended that precludes use of the roof as a terrace. Condition number 9. The front of the property there is shown in that photograph. You can see it with the white painted first floor, and you can see that there are some properties in the area that do have some forms of terraces above the mansard roofs. But again, that's not proposed now at this property. That's a high-level photograph taken looking across at the application property again there, with the whitewashed or white painted first floor. And you can see there the form of the existing roof with the dormer windows. And that's the existing rear of the property. So you'd have seen there's been a lot of discussion in neighbours' letters and in the reports, all relating to the rear elevation. Obviously, the key sort of planning consideration for windows in the rear is overlooking, and closely related to that would be noise disturbance. Now, you can see there that there are existing windows in the rear elevation that are actually openable, and that they're not obscured either. So those are the windows that are going to be changed or proposed to be changed in the application, but do keep that rear elevation in your minds as you go through. This is a drawing that shows you the parts of the building that would be removed or demolished. And you can see there in the top right corner, that's the rear elevation, and you can see the existing windows in grey, and then the areas in the rear elevation that would be removed are identified in the sort of reddy brown colour. And then the lower part of it shows how the existing roof would be removed. And then that's the proposed front elevation and the proposed rear elevation. So I think the important things there, I mean, it's self-explanatory. Obviously now that the existing smaller openings in the rear elevation would be replaced by those larger openings. There would be a bedroom window, bedroom number 2 window on the left-hand side, and then a bathroom window on the right, and then a further kitchen window at the bottom left. I'll sort of use that slide to remind ourselves of the conditions that are recommended in the report. And you'll see that condition number 11 applies to all the rear windows. So that condition would apply to these 3 windows in the rear elevation. There's a separate condition relating to the roof lights at roof level. But condition number 11 is that, or rather requires that those windows in the rear elevation shall be obscurely glazed and permanently fixed shut and be so maintained. So that condition would avoid overlooking and would avoid noise disturbance by virtue of the fact that windows couldn't be opened and couldn't be looked through. And then that's a section through the proposed building. So you can see there the proposed roof form, which is basically a tidied up mansard with a dormer window at the front and then roof lights in the rear slope. And that's the last slide, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes, Councillor Lowry.
I mean, I think it's pretty clear from the objections that the residents on the other road, Westbourne Park, have been suffering for a long time because of, and their issue is the fact that there is a lack of enforcement and the fact that there's an existing condition for windows to be fixed shut, which is not being abided by. So I want to know how officers intend to deal with this, given these windows now being replaced and are openable. Like how are we going to enforce this condition?
Is there currently the windows currently conditioned to be fixed shut? The existing windows? Is that correct?
No, I think the enforcement history actually relates to the question of a terrace. That there has been an enforcement history, which is set out in the history section on page 2 of the report. I'm not aware to enforcement about these specific windows in this property.
Because the enforcement I'm talking about is that apparently there was a condition on the application that's listed on page 2, one of the previous applications, that windows at the rear of the property shall be kept in a closed position, shall be fixed shut. And that's why in a lot of the objections they're mentioning the fact that that hasn't been enforced properly. But I believe that there is a fixed shut condition. It's the TP 960399.
Right, so you're referring to paragraph 615 in the report, which refers to the condition on the 1996 permission.
Yep.
I mean, there has to be an expectation that every condition would be enforced. I can't explain why a condition in the 90s wasn't enforced. I mean, let's just say for the sake of argument that it wasn't. Every condition is there for a reason. The implication is that in the absence of a condition, permission should be refused. So there's definitely an expectation that every condition should be enforced. I can't explain why the 90s condition wasn't enforced.
But in today's application, is that condition, I understand, will be there. There will be a will there be a fixed shut condition?
Yes,
on this? Yeah.
there would be a fixed shut, obscured glazing condition. And I mean, there has to be every expectation that we would be enforcing that condition. I cannot think of a good reason not to enforce it. All enforcement is discretionary. I can't explain what happened previously in the property's history. For some reason, the condition may not have been enforced, or there may have been a decision somehow that it wasn't expedient to do so at the time for some reason. But I don't know the detail of that. But what I can say is that the condition has to be necessary to make an application acceptable. And I mean, if there were residents here in the room, I'd be saying to them that they should expect that we would be enforcing that condition should there be a breach.
Any other questions? Councillor Woodger.
Most of the objections were about it being a terrace, but obviously the terrace, there's clearly no roof terrace, and that's been stipulated. So, yeah, I think other than that, it's acceptable.
Okay, well, in which case we'll proceed to a vote. The recommendation is to grant. Councillor Woodger.
To grant, Chair.
Councillor Lowry.
To refuse.
And I'll vote to grant, so that's 2-1. Permission is granted. So we now proceed to...
Linda.
Oh, yes. Councillor Wade can join us again. Number 2, Pembroke Walk.
So what we're going to do next?
2 Pembroke Walk.
This is an application that has been before the committee before. You'll recall that there was discussion last time relating to the quality and appropriateness of the bricks and whether they were real bricks or not. I think it was actually Councillor Spalding who spotted that some of the bricks on the front elevation would actually have been brick slips and not proper bricks. So the application under the condition is back before us, this time with confirmation that actually the brick panel that you see there is a real brick panel, and that the front elevation would now be completed in real bricks as opposed to brick slips. I mean, just to be clear, brick slips would have the same outer appearance, but the problem with the brick slip is that it could, in the fullness of time, it could detach itself from the building behind and be harder to maintain. Whereas real bricks obviously laid one on top of the other and they just remain in position. And the drawings here just confirm that all parts of the elevation there would now be constructed in the proper full brick.
Any questions? No? Okay. Well, let's proceed to a vote. It's quite a simple one. Recommendation is to grant. Councillor Woodger.
To grant in honour of Councillor Spalding.
Yep. Councillor Lowry. Councillor Wade. And I vote to grant as well, so that's passed unanimously. And we, thank Malcolm for bringing that to our attention and making sure we get proper bricks there. So we now proceed to Torcourt.
This is another simple one. or at least it should be a simple one. That's the existing pair of gates that lead obviously from the pavement to the interior parts of this part of the site. It's proposed to replace those two gates with two taller gates to the same height as the wall that you see flanking the gates at the moment. So in plan, that confirms that the gates would open inwards. Obviously, if there were outward opening gates, they could then conflict with pedestrian movement along the pavement. But the gates are opening inwards, and then that's an elevation of the proposed gates. So you can see that they're black painted metal to the height of the wall on each side. And that's the last slide.
Councillor Wade.
Tor Court was built when, in the 60s? 70s?
I'd probably go for late 50s, actually, but it could be 60s.
All right. I think that I can understand their reason for having taller gates, because they say they're airspeed, etc. But why have they gone for Victorian gates when they're actually a modern mid-century building, whereas the original gates were contemporaries with the original building? So, I mean, I would have said on design, I just think trying to do Victorian gates on a mid-century building.
I mean, are the gates specifically Victorian?
Well, look at this.
I'd suggest that they're not strictly Victorian either. I mean, but black painted metal gates are commonplace in the conservation area. These gates are probably more ornate, maybe, than gates might have been in the 60s. Yes, that would probably be true. They're probably not as ornate as many of the Victorian gates are. I'd also say, well, you know, at the end of the day, there's no real town planning reason. It's not a listed building. Right. So there's not really a planning reason why they would have to have 1960s gates.
Yeah, the building on the other side, just looking at Google Street View of those gates, is not a 1950s, much older building, probably Victorian. So I wouldn't say, it's not like the whole street has a...
No, I did go and have a look, but it was just, I thought it was a... Yeah. Okay.
No, fair point. Any other questions?
Does this actually require planning permission?
Does it require
Yes,
planning?
they do require planning
It does
permission.
require planning permission?
Yeah.
Okay, I was checking. Sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
Well, they wouldn't require planning permission if they were a metre tall, but over a metre, they need permission.
Any other questions, or should we proceed to a vote? Okay, the recommendation is to grant. Councillor Woodger?
To grant, Chair.
Councillor Lowry? Councillor Wade? And I vote to grant as well, so that passes unanimously. So we now move to 115 to 117 High Lever Road.
Right, so this is an application, again, that the property has been before the committee relatively recently. It's proposed to amalgamate two residential units within the existing block of 4 flats, and then to extend it at the rear and carry out other alterations. I'll start, before I show you the slides, just by drawing your attention or reminding you of the addendum report that was circulated yesterday afternoon, where it's proposed that an informative is actually added to any permission granted. And I'll just read out the informative just so everyone understands it, which is, you are advised, in other words, the applicant is advised, that this planning permission, including the amalgamation of 2 of the 4 existing flats, has been assessed and granted on its own merits, and that you should not assume that planning permission would necessarily be granted for an amalgamation causing further loss of housing units within the block. So no one can prevent a future application which would have to be judged on its merits, but it's just a pointer as to how it might be assessed. And then the second element there is just correcting the description of development, which, as submitted on the application form, included the words includes retention of 2 existing flats in the description. For some reason that was later omitted from the description, but it would be correct to replace the words to have the full description, which I've just done there in the addendum reports. So that the description of development would say includes retention of 2 existing flats. To take you through the proposals then in the images, you can see there the existing building 115, 117 sort of identified with the red line. 115 and 117 were originally built as houses. They were later converted into the 4 flats that basically combined the 2 buildings to form four dwellings in one combined building with one combined entrance. So that's why the red line goes around what obviously would have been 2 houses at one point. And that's the front elevation. It's interesting to study the photograph for a second, and you'll see that there's an obvious original door arch on the left-hand side and an obvious original door arch on the right-hand side. When the buildings were amalgamated and converted to a single building of 4 flats, then a single entrance was built between them that you can see at the centre of the image. And the original door arches were infilled with windows. And then simply a central section leading into a hallway in the middle. Remember how that's divided. There's a door on the left and then a smaller section on the right, because that relates to the proposal that's before you. That slide shows the areas of demolition sort of within and at the rear of the building at ground floor level. So you can see there the proposal is to alter the rear and sort of basically remove the structure at ground floor level at the rear that you see identified in the red hatching. And you can see it's also proposed to remove some of the internal structure at the front within the existing common hallway. That's also a demolition drawing for the rear elevation. So you can see the parts of the rear elevation that would be removed. And then that's a section taken through the building, again showing the removal of the lower part of the rear elevation at the side. And you can see there at the right-hand side of the image the existing balcony, which would be removed and replaced. That's the other section, again showing the rear extension. And that shows that there's a closer up image of the existing hallway. So you can see the existing building has a single front entrance, and then there's a door leading to the left and a door leading to the right. So that's a common hallway at ground floor level. And then the proposal that's before you this evening essentially retains the front door on the left-hand side, and then it creates a store on the right-hand side. So the front door on the right-hand side has now been moved back to the original front door position, and the space that is currently part of the shared hallway is now converted to a store accessed only from the outside. There's no internal link between the store and the main building. And that's the proposed front elevation. And then the proposed ground floor plan. So you can see there that there's a full width extension proposed at the rear, basically infilling the existing light well at the side. And then that's the rear elevation as proposed. So that the balcony has been reduced in scale since this was previously before the committee. And a further change, if you look at the left-hand side of the slide, you can see that the neighbouring property has a glazed infill within their light well. And you can see that the main bulk of the proposed extension has been pulled back away from the party wall, so that the party wall would still be raised to a height of 2.5 metres, but then the greater height of the rear extension steps back away from that. And then that's the long section taken through the infill extension at the rear. And that's the last slide.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wade.
There's concern about the numbering, whether the fact that it says in some of the application 115, 117, whether in fact it should be slightly more precise, whether or not there should be a condition that the next door property should not be converted. But actually there's considerable concern, and 2 surveyors have produced measurements which would indicate this goes over the 170 square metres. We touched on the problem of amalgamations earlier, but I think the fact that the one in Abingdon Road, if we can refer to it, was a 1 bed in the basement, and then with three on the next floor. So you could see that there was some 1 bed flat being amalgamated. There was some justification. But here you've got two bed flats. And I still don't see the justification, especially if it's going over that threshold. And the man, I don't believe, didn't do a pre-app, did he? So we found a problem in his first application where it was kind of slightly muddled and he's made amendments. But we still come back to this basic issue of losing potentially two beds. And also that whether or not the storage area is included in the overall calculation. So I think that I still feel that this is an unresolved application.
So the Councillor Wade raises a few points there. The 2 I'd put additional emphasis on, because I was going to ask them myself, is one, how can we be sure that the area calculations are correct, that it's under 170, even excluding the store area? And then secondly, on what basis is the decision made to exclude the store area? Because there could be arguments on either side, and I know certainly one objector wrote in saying that, I can't remember who he referenced, but said under some legislation that the store area should be included. So if you could answer those 2 in particular, that would be very helpful.
Well, I think in terms of the store, if the store was included, there's no doubt that that would take it above the 170 square metre threshold. I think if the store was included, it would rise to about 174 square metres, so clearly above the threshold. Is the creation or the utilisation of that space as a store a mechanism to come in below the threshold? I mean, I would suggest almost certainly yes. I mean, the store that space could have been used differently. The fact it's been separated with an outside entrance gate, I would suggest, is almost certainly a mechanism to come in beneath the policy. That said, that is the way the application is presented. And the floor plans that have been submitted and the floor plans that the decision has to be taken on show that the dwelling would be beneath 170 square metres in terms of its habitable floor space. As I say, if the store was to be included, it would take it above that floor space, but the store isn't included.
Chair.
Sorry, to follow up on that, sorry, quickly 1 second. So there's a debate around the store whether to include that or not. But aside from the store, how confident can we be that the rest of the area is under 170?
I'm confident that the rest of the property is under 170.
It's 169, I think.
Yeah, it's 169. I mean, it's close, but it's there. So yeah.
I mean,
Councillor Lowry.
The rest of the property is 169, yes, it's on the threshold, but we do have a professional surveyor who have conducted a survey and say that according to RICS, according to the professional authority, you should be including that extra area, which obviously brings us above. But surely the principle of the matter is the fact that there is so much ambiguity around whether this breaches the threshold or not shows, and there are professional opinions clearly indicating that it does, shows that this is a very, very sort of unsatisfactory application, to be honest. We shouldn't be approving something on the basis that it could be 1 square metre below a threshold, according to one paper, when in actual fact there are other professional surveys indicating that it is above the threshold. I think that the principle of us arguing over whether we can accept it based on the fact that 169 is acceptable is totally wrong, because the crux of the matter is this borough is short in housing, and we shouldn't be using that as an excuse to amalgamate, especially in this area of North Kensington. I find it quite disturbing.
No, I know there's a question in there somewhere, Councillor Lowry.
But my question is, why have the officers taken the view of and totally disregarded the 2 surveyors we have who indicate that there is that the threshold is breached? Why have they taken one opinion and ignored the other 2? That is my concern.
Why has the report come to the conclusion that this store should not be included in the calculation?
I mean, the simple answer to that is that there is nothing in any planning policy that sort of stipulates whether a store like that or similar to that should be included as internal floor space, as habitable floor space. I mean, the same could be applied to a shed in the garden or a garage. You know, there are external spaces that can take many forms. I mean, it could be argued that this is a mechanism to keep under the policy threshold, of course. In terms of how officers have weighed it up, I mean, clearly officers have weighed up all the opinions that have been given to us. And, you know, you can see easily, you could work the ground floor of the building in a different way that would be over the threshold. But I think ultimately, why has the decision been taken you know, as it is before you, which is, the reason is because this is the application as laid before us, as a matter of fact.
So, just to be clear, so there's nothing in policy which says that that an external storage area should be included in internal floor space, but is the opposite stipulated, or is it actually a grey area?
I wish the opposite was, but it's not. It's not.
So it is a grey area.
I mean, the applicant would immediately point out, well, there's nowhere that says it shouldn't be cut yet. Unfortunately, that is a grey area, so you just have to take a reasonable decision based upon what's before you.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, Councillor Wade.
It's acknowledged that the storage area is for the unique use of this application.
I would assume so. I'm not sure.
It's also considering that the existing front door will be in the side flank wall, i.e., at the moment you come in through the front door, and the 2 front door entrances to 115 and 117 are in the flank walls, aren't they?
Yes.
All right. And you've got this area designated as a storage area, which we presume in this application is for the unique use of within this application. What is to say that the applicant just doesn't open up the aperture again and then include it? I mean, is there anything that could be? I mean, I'm just thinking that is there a way? One, we have to make sure that they don't do the same for the next door building, but secondly, given this fact that this is a grey area and we have some uncertainties, is there a condition which says that they cannot use that aperture and that actually planning could enforce it?
Yes, I think there is. I mean, I think that if the committee had a concern that, you know, that exactly as you describe, I mean, that there could easily be a condition that would require that no internal openings were made to the storeroom and that the storeroom should remain externally accessed only. I mean, the reason for that condition would have to be well, basically to be a housing policy condition to preserve the integrity of the dwelling, you know, within the thresholds as prescribed in the housing policy.
Thank you.
So that could be done.
Although it doesn't actually protect housing, of course, the fact that it remains a storeroom.
It would be a storeroom ancillary to the block. I mean, the condition doesn't even have to specify which flat in the block that the store should be related to. So the condition could simply say ancillary to the residential block. And I think we could guess it would be the occupants of 117, but the condition doesn't have to specify that.
I mean, the part in between 117 and 115 where it's joined, presumably that isn't original,
No,
where the doors
it's all an infill.
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose the irony is that they would probably get planning permission to get rid of the infill and restore the original buildings. Then they could amalgamate and stay under 170 and then apply for a new infill after that. But anyway, we can't predict what might happen in the future. I had just a question about the rear. So we're losing a bay window. What's the rear of the buildings on that street like currently? Is there some level of uniformity? Will we be breaking a nice uniform line of period bay windows by allowing them to destroy that bay window?
Well, yes. I mean, the proposal would lose the original bay that you can see there in that section, that sort of just juts out slightly into the light well. In that section at the left-hand side, you can see where the bay would be removed. I would imagine that the same would have been true of the neighbouring property that has a glazed infill within their light well. If you look at the section there, you can see the boundary wall, the passy wall, in between the two sections of the rear well. And my guess is that almost certainly the neighbouring property would have been built with a bay window in the well exactly as at this property. They're not listed buildings. The character of the area, as you can see, is one of quite significant rear extensions. I mean, I don't know if you can see enough detail in the aerial image there. But there are infill extensions of one form or another. I think I'm right in saying on just about every property in that image. So the bay window, as may have existed on all the properties at some point, has certainly been lost on virtually all of those properties. If it was a listed building, the recommendation would obviously be to retain the bay window, but it's not listed. And I think the other point I'd make is that, as you can see from the depth of the light wells, I mean, the bay window clearly could be appreciated from within the property, but it wouldn't really be visible from wide angles of view within the conservation area. So it's not to say it's without its character, but I don't think it's a key component in the character of the conservation area.
That's helpful. I think, I think the loss of that bay window, while in some senses unfortunate, probably isn't a strong enough reason on which to refuse planning. In terms of the amalgamation, we've heard from Mr. Taylor that it is a grey area whether to include the external store or not in in the calculations, and so I think that is very much a reasonable thing for the committee to consider and make a decision on either way. I think there would be good arguments in both directions. Do we want to add, before we bring it to a vote, do we want to add a condition around the thing you suggested, Councillor Wade, that the storeroom couldn't be accessed from the inside? Yes?
If you were minded to approve.
Well, that's what we'd be voting on. So it doesn't mean we have to vote for it.
No,
It's
of course not, but if it was approved.
Yeah. So we should give, I think it would be the right thing to do to add appropriate conditions.
We need to have clarity that actually the next door building can't have the set be amalgamated as well.
But the problem is, as they've explained, each application to its own, which
know.
I expressed issue with before. But anyway,
There is a suggested informative, as Mr. Taylor read out at the start, around that, but it doesn't prevent them from coming back. The planning application for the other building, but we really can't do anything to prevent that tonight. Yes, Councillor Woodger.
I can give you my 2 cents on this application, having listened to all these different discussions. I'm uncomfortable with it, to be honest. I think this discussion around the external storage is sort of, in some ways, I think the policy needs to be tested. And if we reject this, and if it goes to appeal, then in that scenario, it can be tested. As I say, obviously there's a loss of residential unit here. I think when you weigh up the balance, I think it's slightly tipping more into the negative than the positive. Obviously, officers may have to make recommendations, but I think just on this one, I think the other way potentially on this one. It's pretty marginal, obviously, but that's how I'm minding more to refuse than to grant.
I'm minded to refuse this. There is a shortage of housing in principle, not only in St Helens, but across the borough as a whole. My view is that a manipulated study has been presented to therefore come to the conclusion that this is 1 square metre below the threshold. We shouldn't be on principle approving applications where there are grey areas such as this. And we shouldn't be looking for ways to get around our own policy, especially when it comes to serious issues like housing supply. That's my crux. That's the crux of the argument why I'm not going to be voting for this.
Understood. So do we want to add a condition, or do we just want to vote on it as has been presented to us? If there's no one planning to propose a condition, I suggest we just... Okay, we'll vote on it as is. The recommendation is to grant. Councillor Woodger?
To refuse, Chair.
Refuse. Councillor Lara?
Refuse.
Councillor Wade?
Refuse.
And I will refuse as well, so that's unanimously refused. We now need to propose a reason. I suggest the reason is quite clear, that we believe it conflicts policy, that it is over 170 square metres, and we don't acknowledge that additional space as being outside of policy.
I think
Councillor Taylor.
Precedent.
Yeah.
I think it'll act as precedent. I think given the fact we've got so many amalgamations coming down the pike, I think we're going to have to be really rigorous as to how we do it, because we're going to just lose housing.
Agreed.
Yep. So, Mr. Taylor, would you be able to word something on those lines?
Certainly, Chairman. I think in the discussion there, all of the words made sense. The conflict with the policy obviously is the key bit. I would just suggest that...
Councillor Wade, we're just listening to Mr. Taylor's suggestion for what we might vote on as a reason.
Yeah, so I was just saying the conflict obviously with the housing policy is the key to the refusal. I would suggest that the refusal doesn't mention precedent, because every case has to be determined on its merits. So precedence as a reason for refusal would weaken the reason for refusal. For instance.
So be as simple as we believe it conflicts with the policy regarding 170 square metres.
I mean, it would result in the loss of a dwelling
Yep.
and failed to comply with housing policy.
Okay, that's simple. Who would like to propose that? Councillor Lowry proposing, second it.
You've got a hand higher. Stretching it out enough.
Okay.
We all proposed it.
Yeah, okay, we'll allow Councillor Woodger to second it. Sorry, Linda. All those in favour of that reason, just raise your hand. Yeah, so we unanimously agree to that reason. Right, so...
On that note, Chair, I have to excuse myself from now.
Yes, absolutely. So we have 2 cases remaining. Councillor Lowry has to excuse himself from the rest of the meeting, but we're still quorate with Councillor Woodger, Councillor Wade and myself. So we move on to Bramley House.
The proposal for Bramley House is to add a green roof system on the main roof and to raise the height of the existing balcony railings. The existing building, that's just an elevation taken from Bramley Road. So you can see a number of the existing balconies there in the existing elevation. And if you look at that closely, you can see that it's each balcony where the changes are to take place. You can see in the red, it just shows the railings to each balcony. It's just raised, and that's a closer up image. So you can see the additional 200 millimetres basically for each railing on each balcony. It's also proposed just to raise the parapet at the upper parts of the building. And those are the slides. I mean, effectively, these amendments would satisfy building regulation requirements. So really, it's an upgrade in safety terms to the existing building.
Thank you very much. A lot of the objections focus on the green roof, but am I right in saying that a green roof in and of itself doesn't actually require planning permission?
Yes, I mean, in itself, the green roof behind the parapet at the top of the building wouldn't materially alter the appearance of the building. I mean, in town planning terms, a green roof is a good thing. I mean, it's in sustainability terms. It sort of ticks the right boxes and is supported by policy. What I would say in terms of who pays for the green roof, that isn't a material planning consideration.
Understood. Councillor Wade.
Green roofs need maintenance, or otherwise they become difficult to manage. Is there a management plan in place? Because I notice people are saying that there are cracks and they're concerned about additional cost on their service charge. I just wondered whether that is in progress plan.
Essentially, the management of the building is a matter between those who live in the building and those who own the building. I mean, the planning system just doesn't offer a level of control that could influence that. Is it possible to consider clarification of the management plan? Because a sedum roof, if it's not managed, can become quite soggy if it doesn't get the right drainage, and then you might have problems with your roof.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
It's not wait, okay. Condition 4 at the moment requires the green roof to be fully implemented and maintained thereafter. I don't think we can go down the realms of a management plan for the building, but we might be able to beef that up in some way. But that's as currently worded if you look at condition 4, which talks about ongoing maintenance of the roof.
Does that condition satisfy you, Councillor Wade, or would you like to suggest some additional wording to that?
I think I caught part of that, sorry.
So condition 4 requires for continued maintenance of the roof. Is there anything you would like to add to that to strengthen it?
I I just think there has to be, I know from experience, unless you have a management plan for them, they can get very weedy and then they get very soggy and then you have other problems.
Okay, well, the advice is we probably can't require a management plan, but it does require it to be maintained. Yeah. And as RBKC is the applicant, you could certainly write to Housing Department and recommend that they, I agree, in principle, management plan sounds like a very good idea. It's just probably not consideration for this committee. So should we leave the condition as is then? Yeah, okay. In which case, we should proceed to a vote unless there are any other questions. No. Recommendation is to grant. Councillor Woodger?
To grant, Chair.
Councillor Wade? And I grant, so that's unanimous to grant. And then we go to our final case, the Devonshire Arms Public House.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is relatively simple, I think. It's basically proposing to replace the existing umbrellas at the front of the public house with a new extendable covering. You can see there that the public house obviously has a long-established beer garden at the front. That would not be altered. It would be the same size, the same use, and obviously the licence controls the hours of opening and the number of people at the premises. The application isn't for a change of use, it's just for the awning. And the existing umbrellas would be replaced with a single awning. I think actually the section shows it best. So it's one of those that there are others around. It's just slightly more sophisticated than the existing umbrellas. The arms can extend and they can change the angle of them. But it's just an awning over the front, which can be retracted or extended according to weather conditions. It's still open around all the sides. And as I say, there's no change of use proposed or no increase in the scale of the area. I think that there was some discussion in some of the neighbour letters to do with a new terrace, but there's no new terrace proposed.
Any questions?
It was just clarification as to how people got misunderstood it was a roof terrace. Because most of the objections are about the roof terrace, aren't they?
Yeah, I simply don't know because it's never been past the proposals.
And presumably the access is still going to be through the pub. It's not going to be separate access through the garden.
Yeah, doesn't change the access.
And presumably the advantage of this type of one covering will mean that it reduces noise. Do you think?
I wouldn't go that far. I think the advantage is probably that rain that could fall between the umbrellas at the moment now couldn't do. I don't think it would either make noise worse or better. I don't think it would make much difference noise-wise. I mean, it could be argued that a little more noise might be trapped underneath it, but I wouldn't even go there. I don't think it would make any significant difference either way, noise-wise.
Because noise is a consideration, because it's quite a densely populated area there, and it's quite a busy pub. So, do you feel that in the materials used might suppress noise, or?
I don't. Right. I think if noise was going to come from the beer garden, it would come from the beer garden with or without the proposed awning. I don't think the awning would make any real difference. Okay.
I think it is good that we've clarified those 3 points, that there is no roof terrace proposed, that the access is just the same as before, no change in access, and that nor are we making a decision on changing the amount of outdoor space available. It's exactly the same as before. This is just a different type of awning. There is also permitted development rights coming into place for awnings. Is that correct, Mr. Taylor? So
That is correct.
Yeah.
It passed of the temporary coronavirus legislation 2 years ago included provision for temporary awnings and a whole range of outside tents and structures for hospitality premises. Recent changes to permitted development rights have actually made some of those changes permanent now. So there are actually permitted development rights for a public house or a restaurant or a hotel to erect awnings and tents of various forms, subject to conditions.
Yeah, no, that's helpful to know. Well, I think the large majority of the objections in any case are addressed by the clarifications that we just discussed. Right, so the recommendation is to grant. Councillor Woodger.
To grant, Chair.
Councillor Wade. To grant, yep. And I vote to grant, so that's unanimously passed. And that was the final case. So we bring this evening's proceedings to a close.